Welcome everyone to our meeting today, which is the meeting of the Transport, Regeneration and Climate Policy Committee. It is our first meeting of the calendar year, so Happy New Year to everyone, even though we are in February. The meeting, of course, is open to the public, and I'm pleased to see that we do have a number of residents here today asking questions, which is really, really good. As we would normally say, there are no items that contain exempt information. The meeting will, of course, be webcast, and the recording will be available for people to watch later through the Council's website. And, of course, it might be possible that Sheffield Live TV might record and rebroadcast this meeting. Now, for the benefit of everyone, we have received one petition, 6 remit questions, so that's the remit of this committee that we oversee. And also 4 supplementary questions to those today. We have also received no statements as well, which is which is an innovation that has been brought in within this municipal year. Please, of course, can I request that mobile phones and other such equipment are switched off to silent mode. There's no fire alarm that is planned, but if we do have one, then please take instruction from the Town Hall staff, and that assembly point is Tudor Square. I am going to ask each committee member in turn to introduce themselves, and I will start out with Councillor Sanger. Councillor Sanger.
Councillor Andrew Sanger, Councillor for Forward Ward and Lib Dem Group spokesperson.
Councillor Richard Shaw, Councillor for Chief Greenhill Ward.
I am Janet Riddler, Councillor for Stocksbridge and Upper Don.
Hi, I'm Craig Gamble-Pugh, I'm Councillor for East Ecclesfield Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Mike Chaplin, I'm a Councillor for Southey Ward, and today I'm substituting for Councillor John Wright.
Hello, my name's Ruth Mercereau and I'm Councillor for City Ward.
I'm Councillor Alexi Diamond, Councillor for Gleadus Valley and Deputy Chair of this committee.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. And I'm Councillor Ben Miskell, and I am Chair of this committee, and the ward that I represent is Park and Arbourthorne. I'll just ask officers who are in a seated position with a microphone to introduce themselves. Of course, throughout the course of the meeting today, there'll be other officers that will introduce themselves. Sean.
Thanks, Chair. I'm Sean McLean, Director of Regeneration and Development.
I'm Robert Parkin, Assistant Director for Legal Services.
I'm Rachel Appleyard, Principal Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, colleagues. So that moves us on to item 1 of our agenda, which is an opportunity to receive any apologies for absence. I'll just turn to Rachel to clarify.
Thank you, Chair. So we've received apologies from Councillors Ian Horner and John Wright, and we've got Councillor Chaplin substituting for Councillor Wright.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chaplin, for stepping in as well and attending the meeting today. So that therefore takes us to item 2, which is a standard item in our agenda for us to consider whether there's any need for an exclusion of the public or press. The meeting today, of course, is open to the public, and there's no items on the agenda that contain any exempt information that will require us to exclude any member of the public or press. Item 3 is an opportunity for members, if they wish to declare an interest in any of the items of discussion on the agenda today. Can I ask colleagues if they do wish to make a declaration on an item of business to state whether it's a pecuniary or a personal interest and outline the reasons for that declaration? Do I see any colleague who wishes to make a declaration of interest? I don't, so that therefore takes us to item 4 of our agenda. So this is minutes of our previous meeting, which you'll find in your agenda pack and is also available for people to view online. Can I ask members of the committee whether they're minded to approve as an accurate record the minutes of our meeting, of our last meeting that was held just before the Christmas period on the 18th of December of last year? I'm seeing nods in the room, no one wishing to add any point of clarification. So therefore we will approve as a true and accurate record the minutes of our previous meeting held on the 18th of December of last year. So thank you, colleagues. Item 5 is an opportunity for the public to ask questions and also for us to receive petitions. It's a really important part of the work that we do here, because everything that we do needs to be rooted in the best interests of residents that we seek to serve, but also we want to co-produce so many things in this council, so we're interested to hear people's views. Now, of course, there's a maximum of 30 minutes for this item of business. We have received one petition. The petitioner is not able to attend the meeting today, therefore a written response will be provided and will be published on the council's website. We have received 6 remit questions in addition to that petition, and the petitioners have received written responses that have been circulated to members of the committee and also published on the council's website. In addition to those 6 remit questions, 4 of them have been carried forward as supplementary questions that we've received. And I'm going to invite people in this order to come up and to read out their supplementary questions. Just to give you an idea of the order, the committee would appreciate if we would hear from Nigel Slack first, Graham Rowe second, and Roy Morris finally as well. There was also another supplementary question from David Cronshaw, who isn't attending, but of course will receive a written response. So we've got 3 people who are going to come before us today. So Mr. Slack, it's lovely to see you. Would you be okay to come and sit down at the table and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everybody. My name is Nigel Slack, and I'm here today as Chair of the Victorian Society in South Yorkshire. Briefly, before I start the question, I have had to change my question today following some pressure and threats from within the Council about one paragraph in the question. I will be dropping that paragraph since I don't want to impact on the work that I do within the heritage sector. So, my supplementary question. Thank you for your response. I note from that response the comments about the progress on refreshing both the Kelham Island and city centre conservation appraisals. I attended the Council's session for the Conservation Advisory Group on this on Monday, and it was very illuminating. What became clear among the heritage groups represented was the consensus, far from looking to expand the city centre conservation area to the east, to cover the proposed Castlegate conservation area, it was more relevant to look at extending the city centre conservation area to the west, taking in areas like West Street, the Moor and other surrounding areas. If this becomes the recommendation of the consultants, where will that leave Castlegate and the vulnerable buildings in that area? And will a decision on Castlegate still be made before the financial year end? And is immediate designation one of the options for moving this decision forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Slack, and of course you raised a number of concerns at the start of your question. We're more than happy to discuss that further and hear more, perhaps outside the context of this meeting, and no doubt colleagues will be very keen to hear more as well. So, of course, thank you very much for your question and the ongoing dialogue that you and others in the heritage community do have with us on this and many other issues. It's also really positive to hear that as part of the Sheffield Conservation Advisory Group that you've been able to contribute to this work. And a note, of course, with the change to your question today, you haven't reflected on that meeting that you did have with the Sheffield Conservation Advisory Group, but I note the written summary that you did provide to me and has been distributed to members of the committee. At this point, I think it's probably important to say that it is appropriate to allow the consultants team to make their informed recommendation, which we are still expect to receive at the end of March, and then we can consider the next steps going forward. This remains the advice of officers and receive no objections when being presented at cross-party briefings. As always, we're keen to work with you on this and other matters. We do all have meetings with you, both as part of this wider meeting, but of course on an individual basis as well. I know that I've met with you and the Heritage Champion as well, Councillor Janet Riddler, and I'll continue to do so in the future. So thank you very much for your question today. Councillor Campbell-Pugh.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a point of order, I believe. I was just slightly concerned to hear the questioner mention that they felt that they had to change their question due to, I think the phrase was threats. I wondered whether we could get clarification on the rationale for the change of the question from officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Campbell-Pugh. I think the start of answering the question to Mr Slacker did reflect on the fact that we were very much willing to enter into a dialogue about some of the statements that he'd made there, because we do need to understand them in a much more fuller context. But I will pass over to Robert for some legal advice.
Well, obviously, it's a concern, and I think the Chair relayed obviously the importance of hearing about those concerns in detail. Seems to me that the best place to do that would be in a direct discussion. We, as officers, wish to reach out to the gentleman and hear his concerns and deal with them that way. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, and of course, Councillor Campbell-Pugh, it's very good that you asked that question for clarity. Mr Rowe, thank you very much for your question, but also the supplementary question that you have provided. Your original question, of course, has been published on the website, as will be the supplementary response as well, so it forms part of the public record. Mr Rowe, you have an opportunity to read out your question.
Thank you, Councillor Mistle. With your permission, I'd like to give you all, well not all, each party group a little graph to put in your office more notice board that you have, to remind you of the massive task that you have.
Mr Rowe, okay, I appreciate that, and thank you very much. I think you did supply the graph as part of your question, and that has been provided to colleagues as well. It's important to say as well, when we move around the room for those people with accessibility needs, we can't always, all of us, hear what you're saying, so it's really important that we do stay in a seated position.
Okay. So thank you for the response to my question. I'm afraid I don't share your optimism of how the Labour government is going to help you meet your carbon budget. The government can't be trusted to tackle climate change when they're expanding airports and have U-turned from the £28 billion they were originally going to spend on the Green New Deal to concentrate on unproven carbon capture and storage. The government continues with austerity, and they're not going to provide councils with the funding required to achieve net zero. So I would like Sheffield Council to begin a campaign to try to secure the necessary resources that you need to meet net zero from the government. And I'd like you to amend the Climate Action Report, which you're discussing later on the agenda, in two important ways. Firstly, it's very important to be transparent about how Sheffield Council have significantly overspent their carbon budget with an increasing deficit each year. That's why I've given you these graphs. You need to explain that getting to net zero by 2030 will need dramatically deeper change than it did 6 years ago. Previous plans need replacing with emergency responses which reflect reality. Secondly, it's vital for the report to explain the hothouse Earth theory, which is now a real possibility because worldwide temperatures are consistently above the 1.5 degrees centigrade threshold. Human-caused greenhouse gas emissions may now trigger a series of self-reinforcing feedback loops, leading to a runaway heating effect where global temperatures rise significantly beyond pre-industrial levels, causing massive sea level rise and rendering large parts of the planet uninhabitable. It would lead to the collapse of society, and the loss of billions of lives, and this must be avoided at all costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rowe, for your supplementary question. Of course, whilst we all value this open dialogue on the issue, our primary focus does have to remain on delivering outcomes. And citizens are always encouraged to participate in our democratic process, but it's important to recognise that responding to inquiries inevitably takes officers away from their core work that directly contributes to the progress that we all care about when it comes to tackling the climate emergency. So, for example, in this case, whilst assisting officers whilst assisting in drafting responses for me on this issue and other queries, the officer responsible was also working to score the local area energy plan tenders ahead of a critical 5 p.m. deadline yesterday. This task is essential for decarbonising Sheffield's energy network, a key focus and priority for the city. And I hope you can appreciate that this has been our focus. We are, of course, busy delivering. As reported last year, our annual climate report once again is clear that urgent action is needed at scale, not seen before, and in order for us to be able to achieve our 2030 ambition. Sheffield is not unusual amongst local authorities in the challenges that we do face, and we continue to work really closely with other leading councillors and councils across the country to influence national policy and push for the necessary changes to escalate our activity. Alongside this, we're also actively exploring options to secure investment. We're also working with Simca and South Yorkshire's Mayor Oliver Coppard to secure additional resources from government as part of the single settlement proposals. Additionally, we have included an assessment of the annual carbon budget within our annual report, which highlights that Sheffield has already used over half, which is 54% of the total carbon budget. To remain within the recommended limit, the city would need to achieve average CO2 mitigation rates of minus 12.3% per year from 2020 onwards, reaching zero or near zero carbon, which will be a 95% reduction no later than 2045. These challenges are significant, and whilst we remain committed to engaging with residents and stakeholders, our priority must be delivering the transformational changes that are needed in order to meet our climate commitments. And it's important to thank you for coming today, but I think it's also important to say that in preparing for answering many questions today, our officers are taken away from the core purpose of what they need to be doing, and that really is our response to the climate emergency. We are doing some amazing things, and we do want to continue to work with the wider Sheffield community in order to be able to deliver on our climate commitments. So thank you, Mr. Rowe, for your question. Our next questioner, I think, is Mr. Morris. Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. Just a brief question in response to your answer that the question of the parking scheme, the green parking scheme for the city centre is going to be discussed by yourselves in the Transport Committee and in the Waste and Street Scene Committee. I just wondered if possible for members of the public to be involved in that discussion, or at least to observe the discussion that would take place.
Absolutely, and thank you very much, Mr. Munn, for your Mr. Morris, for your question today. It's important to say that the process that we outlined to you, I think, as part of your original question, was that a report on the recommendations to the review for this particular issue, and you mentioned about the green parking permits, would come to this committee, the Transport, Regeneration and Climate Policy Committee. And as always, as part of that, the report will be published in advance, and the meeting will be open to the public, and those members of the public are able to attend. They're also able to view the webcast at home. Members of the public may well wish, and we would welcome it from you, to raise questions on this issue for consideration at that meeting, which would then, of course, inform the nature of the debate that we would then subsequently have, and we would encourage you to do so. We'd also you're also welcome to engage directly with members of this committee on this and other issues, and I know that you have done in the past, particularly with your work with regards to public transport as well, and I know that colleagues would be very appreciative if you would engage with them on this matter, particularly if you do have strong views on it. So thank you very much. There will be opportunities for you to participate in our meeting whenever this gets to a decision point. Thank you. Our next item of our agenda today moves us on to member questions, which is item 6 on our agenda. Now, there's a maximum time limit of 10 minutes for this particular item of business. Now, we have received 3 questions from, I think, one member of the committee. Now, written answers have been provided and they've also been circulated to all members of the committee. And as I understand it, they're also available, I think, on the council's website for us to have a little look at as well. The item of business provides an opportunity for members of the committee who've submitted the questions to then ask one supplementary question to each question. I think it's probably important to say that whilst we have this formal opportunity within the confines of this committee, we do meet very regularly, and there's also an opportunity for us to also ask questions as part of knowledge briefings. And I know that we've also quite recently set up a trio meeting to work on a cross-party basis with Councillor Sanger, with Councillor Diamond and myself, and we meet on a monthly basis to drive forward the business of this committee. Councillor Diamond, is there a supplementary question? You're more than welcome to ask one.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I do have supplementary questions on each of the questions. So on question 1, yeah, I do take and appreciate the collaborative approach that we have on this committee and the progress we have made in many areas. However, I'm now speaking in my capacity as a Green Party councillor, a resident of Sheffield, and also as a human being who lives on planet Earth, and I've got to say I'm petrified about the impact of the climate crisis. It is the reason that I decided to go into politics, and I will not accept any responsibility for the reopening of a failed airport. It has always been the position of Sheffield Green Party to oppose the opening of reopening of Sheffield Doncaster Airport, and indeed the position of the National Green Party is to oppose any and all airport expansion, because it's simply unconscionable to do so in the midst of the climate crisis. My question is the position of the Labour Party, and indeed this committee, that yes, the climate crisis is real, yes, it's an existential threat, but despite this, we support the South Yorkshire Mayor throwing good public money after bad to reopen a failed airport and pour more aviation fuel on the fire of the climate crisis.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. I think with regards to the first question that you raised about Doncaster Sheffield airports, for the benefit of those people who are watching from home, or also those people who may well be in the room, members of this committee were given an opportunity to hear from colleagues at the City of Doncaster Council to outline their case about Doncaster Sheffield Airport, and I think it's important that we gave them that opportunity to do so. I think it's important also to choose words very carefully when it comes to this, because this is their case, isn't it? This is actually about Doncaster Sheffield Airport, but it's about the City of Doncaster Council pushing forward on that, supported by South Yorkshire's Mayoral Combined Authority, and also supported by this council, albeit that is important to state that this is the City of Doncaster Council's project. As we know, last year, I think in June, this council, at full council, discussed this particular issue, and we did reaffirm our support for having an airport in the region and for reopening that site at Doncaster Finningley. And therefore, this council does remain committed to reopening Doncaster Sheffield Airport, albeit this is financed through funds that are allocated to the City of Doncaster Council. We'll continue to have a dialogue with the City of Doncaster Council, and I hope that this committee will receive briefings and updates. And I think it's important to respect the fact that whilst this council does have a view in favour of the reopening of Doncaster Sheffield Airport, there is a diversity of viewpoints, and we must be very respectful of your viewpoints, which will be shared by some people in the city. But I think it's also important to reflect that the vast majority of people in the city do support the reopening of a regional airport. They do so on the basis of the economic regeneration that will be evident through with the reopening of Doncaster Sheffield Airport, but also about the important travel and infrastructure links that will therefore create for our regional economy. So thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Chair. On question 2, I'm not sure if you've read, but Now Then magazine published a thorough investigation in which it argues the case for reopening the airport is irresponsible, environmentally dangerous and economically unfounded. According to a senior economist at the New Economics Foundation, quoted in the article, the economic argument for regional airports doesn't add up and can even harm South Yorkshire's economy. Please can we formally request as a committee that SIMCA publish as much of its data and methodology as possible to support the assertions of growth and job creation referred to in the answer, and also to allow elected representatives to scrutinise it.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. I think it's important to reflect on the answer that I gave you. To be clear, Sheffield City Council is not providing any financial investment towards this particular airport reopening. You know, we did receive a briefing on this earlier today, and which did confirm that position. I think it's probably important to say that you asked a similar question at that briefing, and officers from the City of Doncaster Council gave you an answer about how they were working to make some information that was commercially confidential about their case, about the City of Doncaster Council's case, available to colleagues in other councils outside the City of Doncaster Council. Of course, it's their case, isn't it? It's their information, and therefore they'll decide how best to share that commercially confidential information. But it's something that you raised at that briefing, and it's something that no doubt you'll continue to raise, and something that colleagues may well wish to support as well.
Thank you again, Chair. And this is just in relation to question 3. And I ask this question because I do not think the committee is using all of the tools at our disposal to address the climate crisis, bearing in mind what Graham, Mr. Rowe has just brought to the committee. And I do think it's our responsibility to use all of the tools at our disposal. So I think how we travel is one of the greatest sources of emissions in our city. And parking policy is one of the most important levers that any local authority has to reduce emissions. So I just want to know if the committee will agree to ensure that our review of our parking policy includes consideration of a workplace parking levy, and B, ensure that we will do everything in our power to address the climate emergency and rapidly scale up investment in public transport, walking, wheeling and cycling, so that these modes of transport are affordable and accessible to all, and indeed the most desirable way of getting around our city.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. You mentioned particularly the point about a workplace parking levy. This has been subject to lots of discussion at this committee. I think it's important to reflect on an answer that I probably gave at full council, and that answer was that, of course, all options are always on the table when it comes to exploring solutions to fund public transport investment in the future. However, it's important to reflect on the fact that we have had discussions on a cross-party basis as part of this administration within the Transport, Regeneration and Climate Committee, and at present there's perhaps not a political appetite to take forward a workplace parking levy. I would invite you to speak to citizens in the city and see whether they also share your view about a workplace parking levy, because I think it's important that we do enter into a dialogue with citizens in this city on those sorts of issues. I think it's also important to say, isn't it, that of course all options continue to remain on the table, and we'll continue to explore different options. But at this present stage, I don't think members of this committee support the idea that we'd be introducing a workplace parking levy at the moment. So thank you very much for that. I think it's probably also important to say that further on in the answer, I reflect on how important it is that we are pushing ahead with a number of different proposals as part of our agenda today. We'll notice that we've got an £11 million fund, haven't we, to decarbonise our public transport, to invest, to bring about 30 new electric buses, at least 30 new electric buses to the city. We're going to be bringing about a Stocksbridge hopper bus, which is brilliant, again giving more people options to make that switch away from their private cars and improve public transport, give people more options about how they travel. And you're right to raise the question and the point about the climate emissions that that are made by how we travel in the city. And I think we, on a cross-party basis, are committed to reducing those emissions. And you can see that, can't you, in our transport vision that we agreed on a cross-party basis. And I think we all share that aspiration. So thank you very much for your question. So that therefore moves us on to our next item on the agenda, which is item 7. Now this is our work programme. It's on page 19 of the agenda pack. Rachel, I think, is going to take us through it. I think it's probably important to say that over the past few meetings, we have made some amendments to the work programme in terms of how it looks, and that particularly does help us focus much more on items that will be coming forward this municipal year, but also makes absolutely crystal clear which items are for discussion later on in the next municipal year as well. Rachel, is there anything else that we should be mindful of?
Yeah, I'll just run through a few of the referrals that we've had from council and other committees. So there's a new one on there for this meeting on page 21 relating to the Sheffield Growth Plan. So there was a brief discussion on this at the pre-agenda, and officers are going to speak with the key officers in economic development to discuss the best route for that, because it's a joint resolution along with the Economic Development and Skills Committee. And then just to update on a couple of the outstanding responses to council motions. So there was one from the council motion on Make Sheffield a Pedestrian Friendly City. We will be getting a report on the walking, wheeling, cycling investment plan in April, and the officers working on that report will be feeding those points into there to address what the committee has decided. And then on the motion that was reported at the last meeting regarding Protect Our Rivers, a briefing has just been set up with this committee and the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee to understand how those issues can be raised. So that should be appearing in members' diaries shortly. Any amendments to the work programme are set out on page 23. There are quite a few changes there. And then in Appendix 1, you can see how that's set out for forthcoming meetings as well. And as the Chair mentioned, there is a section at the end which shows the divide between this council year and the next council year. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for taking us through the work programme there, and also making crystal clear that link between motions that are passed at full council and how we address them at this particular policy committee. Do I see any questions or points of clarification from colleagues? Councillor Sanger.
Thanks, Chair, and I appreciate the effort that's gone into getting it this far, but here we are, sort of the third meeting in a row where our agenda is shorter than we expected 3 weeks ago, and we've got a proposed agenda that's very long in March, and proposed for the new meeting in April a reasonable lengthy agenda. So I think my two questions are, do we actually think all these items are going to get to March, and how are we going to fit them into the time? And I say the second question would be, there does seem to be, even with that, there's a number of items that have slipped into next year, and even allowing for the items that slipped into next year, there are items that we want to make a decision on, but we're not going to make a decision either today or the March or the April meeting. So is it now time to say that those items are going to, we need to make the decision that they are going to be into the next municipal year, and we just have to accept that our work programme has been too much for the year.
Thank you, Councillor Sanger. I think it's probably important to reflect on the fact that, as you'll know, things do often fall off our agenda for lots of quite complex reasons. Sometimes the development cycle, in terms of the papers that are brought to us, are buffeted by external influences, through kind of commercial arrangements, through delays that occur because an officer may well be ill or involves another party that isn't necessarily Sheffield City Council as well. So I think it is particularly complex. Whilst we could, of course, discuss this as part of our meeting today, I wonder whether it's something that we should take to our TRC business meeting that is an opportunity for yourself, Councillor Sanger, and Councillor Diamond and myself, and Will Stewart and Sean McLean to get together and we can look at the work programme, and I want to make that as part of a standing item so we can actually have an honest appraisal about things that need to move around and whether we need to kind of move things into kind of the next municipal year, and also it's an opportunity for us to have an early heads up that we can then distribute amongst our political groupings if there are issues in the development of papers as well. I think also Rachel puts together a spreadsheet as well on the development cycle of different papers that have been brought to us, which should give us an early heads up if a paper is going to be dropped off our agenda. Inevitably, sometimes these things will happen, but that does sometimes give us a bit of an early heads up. And Councillor Sanger and Councillor Diamond, I think you've now got access to that. If you don't, then please do tell me and Rachel. Of course, it would be very welcomed if you then share that with your political groups as well, because it's important that we operate on a cross-party basis when it comes to these sorts of things. Councillor Sanger, would that be something that you'd be amenable to take it to that business meeting, the trio business meeting that we have every month?
Well, I'm happy to take it there in addition to continue to raise this. I mean, I've been on this committee now for the whole 3 years, as Councillor Gamble-Pugh has, and at no point have we resolved this. And it is immensely frustrating, and both yourself and the previous co-chairs did everything in their powers to manage the agenda, and that wasn't sufficient. And it's just incredibly frustrating. Clearly, as I accept what you're saying, and I accept that we have items coming up, for example, the local plan, where we do need to create the space, because quite rightly that is a priority for the council to have a local plan. I just think overall, from a member officer working arrangement, it hasn't worked over these last 3 years. Happy to try something else for the remainder of this municipal year, happy to try something else, but I think we've got so many items on this that with the best will in the world and with our officers working as hard as they are working, I don't think we're going to get through these additional items, the items that are currently not on the plan and not on the schedule, with the exception of 1 or 2 really important ones, are just not going to happen. And I'm frustrated that, because I would rather start a municipal year knowing what the work plan was, accepting it's a living document. So happy to take it away to the trio, and happy to have further meetings with Will Stewart. But I just think in the next municipal year we have to have a work plan where it's clear what we're trying to achieve over the 12 months, because for the 3rd year in a row we've not quite managed it. And I hold my hand up as a spokesperson and say I'm part of the problem rather than part of the solution. But we need to find other ways of working, because we can't continue year after year having a work plan which we don't hit. I think, I accept this has been a difficult year with 2 sets of elections, but we just need a better way of working. So happy to take it away, but we're not there yet, and we've had 3 years of trying. And some other committees are not having this problem. SNR are having a bigger problem than us, because their agenda is even more full than ours are, but other committees have a much lighter agenda. So I still think there is an issue about the remit of the committees, and the TRC, the current way it's constituted, means that with the exception of SNR, we have the 2nd largest work plan, and we've not got it right. So yes, happy to take it away, but more work to be done. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sanger, and no doubt your colleagues make those points as part of Governance Committee, and we'd encourage them to do so. I would, however, invite you to look at the adult health and social care agendas, which are absolutely huge, and they do deal with even more business than we do as well. I think we've had discussions also outside this place about how we can streamline our business, which of course are decisions for us, but also decisions for the Governance Committee. I'm particularly keen to look at the Officer Delegation, particularly when it comes to traffic regulation orders, for example, our new school streets, but also our 20-mile-an-hour zones, areas where we all agree on the policy direction that's set forward in our transport vision that's really ambitious for this city, but which many cities have a very different scheme of delegation. So a report wouldn't necessarily automatically be triggered if there was just one objection from a member, from a resident, that would then come to this committee, that would take a huge amount of officer time and take a huge amount of time here to deal with as well. And I'd be really interested in proposals which would address some of those anomalies and allow us to move forward in a more modern and streamlined way, whilst also making sure that we can receive objections appropriately. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I share, as you know, many of the concerns that Councillor Sanger raised, and indeed I raise each meeting. Looking down the work programme, I just want to kind of reiterate the call that we should be delegating these decisions to local area committees, for instance, because there's at least 4 items on the agenda which are very kind of localised, like crossing schemes or 20-mile-an-hour schemes, for instance, which they shouldn't come to what is supposed to be a strategic citywide committee for very, very local schemes. So I would like to reiterate the call that I make each meeting for these local schemes to be delegated to local area committees, because local members know best. They know the issues in those areas much more than we might. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. And I think that's a really important reflection, isn't it? I know it's a case that you make on a number of occasions, a number of meetings. I think it's also important to say, isn't it, that quite clearly that would have significant implication in terms of officer time if we were to have a different scheme of approving various different transport projects. That's not necessarily a reason not to do it, but I think it's something that we would have to be mindful of as well. I think we'd have to be particularly mindful of when it comes to criticism that we often receive, often fairly, but sometimes unfairly, when it's about our speed of delivery. Now, that would potentially have an impact on our ability to deliver on schemes at speed, and particularly schemes that fall in line with our strategic city transport vision. So I think those sorts of things need to continue to be raised and discussed as part of the governance committee, and no doubt you and colleagues will do so, but you make a very impassioned case about it. Councillor Gamble-Pugh.
Thank you. If we are going to be in the business of repeating the same things that we've said meeting after meeting, year after year, then I don't want to be left out, because we've been pushing this point that we should be devolving decisions about the implementation of local schemes to the local decision makers and the local area committees for many years. And I think we sometimes indulge ourselves in the idea that one political group in the council chamber within the administration is more in favour of this kind of devolved decision making than others. I mean, I think that our political party has got a strong track record on devolved decision making, and there's still a long way to go. And certainly in this local authority, this is a really clear thing that we could get on and do it. And you've raised some interesting points today, Chair, about some of the logistical factors. Where are those? Are they being discussed at governance committee? Are we actually getting to grips with it? And will some proposals be coming forward? Will it be this municipal year? Will it be in our lifetime? I just want to add my voice and a sense of urgency to doing that. And in particular, because I think we need to be taking that kind of more strategic view of what the priorities are, because we need to be creating space within this committee's agenda to look at the big issues about climate. So we've had questioners today quite rightly talking about how we need an emergency response to a climate emergency, and we don't have that sense of urgency when our agenda is kind of filled up with things that local area committees could much more adequately iron out the detail on. Thank you, Chair. And no doubt we'll have this again next time.
And no doubt we will have this next time. But I think one thing that this discussion does suggest to us is the need for us all to be speaking to our members of that governance committee, to be making that case, to also make sure that we receive feedback from that governance committee as well, because it is there, isn't it, to improve how we do business, to better the city as well. So thank you very much to colleagues for your contribution there about the work programme. Bearing in mind some of the points that colleagues have made, are colleagues content with us approving the work programme as it is? I can see that people are nodding, which is very, very good. Well, thank you very much, colleagues. That therefore takes us on to item 8, but before I do so, it's probably important for me just to remind members of the committee that for each of the substantive item on our agenda today, we were going to follow this process. An officer will be invited to present their report to the committee. The members of the committee are able to ask questions of officers related to what is being presented. After that, if needed, we will have a debate, and after that we'll have an opportunity to then vote on the recommendations of the report. So item 8 is the local clean air plan, and it's an update, but it also brings forward some very exciting prospects about electrifying our buses across the city. And Tom Finnegan-Smith is going to run us through it. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, hopefully some really exciting news as a result of this report today. Since the Clean Air Zone became operational in March 2023, our monitoring has shown that the majority of the vehicle fleet in Sheffield has continued to upgrade to cleaner, newer vehicles. The report presents that compared to the 2022 baseline surveys we've undertaken, that within the Clean Air Zone, local goods vehicles were 58% compliant, and they're now 88% compliant. Rigid HGVs were 78% compliant, and they're now 96% compliant, and that Sheffield's licensed taxis for private hire vehicles were 73% compliant, and they're now 99% compliant, with Hackney carriages seeing a very significant change from 12% compliance before the CAS to now 92% compliant. A really significant shift and change in the vehicles driving around Sheffield and contributing positively to the improvement in air quality that we reported on last summer. In assisting people to upgrade their vehicles to meet the CAS emission standards, the Council has been operating a financial assistance scheme, and that has supported over 1,750 vehicle grants, with over £6.9 million of CAS grant funding now paid out. New applications for financial assistance have now declined, with an average of 5 to 10 applications per week, but we have set aside a further £5 million to support existing applicants and further eligible applications that we may still receive and expect to receive. So whilst vehicle compliance levels across the city for most CAS vehicle types have significantly improved, the age and emission standards of the bus fleet in Sheffield still remains an issue. Members may remember that our approved Clean Air Plan had proposed to support around 100 buses in Sheffield to achieve compliance through bus retrofit technology. That's previously been used already on around 300 buses in Sheffield. But as a result of national research into bus retrofit technology performance, the DFT have previously paused funding for further retrofits. That was in 2023, and the bus programme was subsequently fully withdrawn in September of last year. As a result, the planned upgrade of buses in Sheffield hasn't proceeded as originally planned. A number of locations in Sheffield, as we reported on last year, where air quality continues to be in exceedance of the legal limits, are heavily influenced by bus emissions. So an alternative approach to upgrading the bus fleet in Sheffield is very much needed. So we've been working closely with DEFRA, the Department for Transport and the Joint Air Quality Unit to secure approval for the use of some of our clean air funding towards a local zero-emission bus scheme. Along with a £2.6 million proposed contribution from the Clean Air Investment Fund, we plan to create an £11.5 million fund to accelerate that transition to electric buses in Sheffield. We do estimate, as you mentioned earlier, Chair, that around 30 buses and associated charging infrastructure at depots could be delivered through this scheme. And we will be continuing to work closely with government to secure further funding for further phases. The changes approved by the Joint Air Quality Unit enable the transfer of uncommitted funds from our financial assistance scheme to increase the funding that we already have for zero-emission buses. In order to give residents and businesses a final opportunity to access our current financial assistance schemes, we're proposing that a time frame for closing down the grant schemes is set, with the recommendation that any new applications should be submitted by the 31st of May, with the intention that all grant payments will be made by the 31st of August of this year. We'll be communicating those timescales clearly to relevant audiences should today's report be approved. In creating a local zero-emission bus scheme and working with bus operators to introduce new electric buses on our priority air quality corridors in Sheffield, we will be taking further targeted action to improve air quality in Sheffield. That is still very much needed as that continuing improvement for people and their healthy lives in Sheffield. But it will also be providing a step change in the quality of the buses that users currently experience in Sheffield, in line with the ambitions to enhance public transport for people in Sheffield. So with that, I'll move to the recommendations, if that's okay, Chair. Any questions?
Thank you, Tom, for taking us through that report, and also thank you very much to your officers as well for putting together the report, but also the work that they have done working alongside government to bring forward these really ambitious proposals, this £11.5 million worth of investment to electrify at least 30 buses in our city, which is really, really important given the context of the climate emergency that we're discussing later on in our agenda, but also important in terms of cleaning our air in the city. Do I see questions from colleagues about the report that Tom has brought before us today? I'll go firstly to Councillor Campbell-Pugh and then to Councillor Sanger. Councillor Campbell-Pugh.
Thanks, Chair. It's a bit of a grumpy I don't think I'm in a very good mood today. 30 buses doesn't sound like an enormous number. What is that as a proportion of the overall fleet? And secondly, those buses are in ownership by the private bus companies who do what they do in the service of the public transport using public. Many of my constituents raise that with me regularly. Is there? I think it's a political point, so I'll leave it there.
Should we just take Councillor Sanger's point and then we can come back to Tom for some answers?
Thanks, yeah. I think the weather is making us all grumpy, but my question was quite similar. I mean, and clearly it's deeply frustrating that we agreed a scheme with the government that we believed that the engineering solution would get the bus fleet up to standard, and the retrofit to move Euro 4 engines to Euro 6 diesels didn't work. The engineering retrofit didn't work. I really welcome this 11 million, but I just wanted to follow on from Councillor Campbell-Pugh's point that welcoming the support from government, absolutely, but what we want is 100% electric bus fleet. It's really pleasing to see the other changes that this, the air quality zone has influence in terms of Hackney carriages and in terms of LGVs and HGVs, but a lot of people historically have said, well, you know, why can't we have clean buses? So 30 doesn't sound like the whole bus fleet. So keen to support the 11 million, but wanting to know when we'll move to 100% electric bus fleet.
Thank you very much, Councillor Campbell-Pugh and Councillor Sanger. And Tom, I guess in your reflections back there, it'd be interesting to hear, and particularly this in the context of bus franchising, because we know that we are but a few weeks now away from that decision being made at a South Yorkshire level, and we know that there'll be a few years gap before bus franchising kicks in, but there'll be ambitious plans, no doubt, to electrify and change the fleet across South Yorkshire. So it'd be really useful to hear your reflections on that.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for those questions. So I'll move through them in order. So 30 buses. We have around about 400 buses operating in Sheffield. 300 of those have previously been through the retrofit programme. 100 of the buses have not, and those are the ones that at the start of the clean air zone, it was intended to use the retrofit technology. I think that was predominantly because it was seen to be the most cost-effective and easiest way of treating a high volume of buses to get to that minimum CAS compliance standard of Euro 6. Clearly, we weren't expecting at all that technology would not perform as expected. It had already gone through a government approvals process. The technology that was fitted to buses in Sheffield and elsewhere across the country, because this obviously isn't just a Sheffield issue, had been through those accreditation programmes with the manufacturers and providers. So in terms of the 30 buses, it is by no means at all clearly the majority of the fleet, but it is a very important first stage in this transition to EV. The electrification of depots in particular is part of the scheme, and again at this point we've not opened our expression of interest to bus operators, but we've been having close conversations with them about this scheme as it develops. We wanted to understand that appetite for them to be involved. We've had very positive conversations with bus operators, and we've welcomed their involvement so far. I think it's worth noting that the funding, whilst £11.5 million is a significant sum of money, that the majority of the funding that will be required in this process will still need to be provided by the bus operator, as the operators that are purchasing those buses through this programme and previous schemes like the National Zero Emission Bus Programme that DFT directly launched and managed. So we will provide a 75% contribution to the net difference between a diesel bus and an electric bus, along with a contribution towards the charging infrastructure. And locking in the electrification of depots is really what will assist in that further rollout and transition towards zero emission fleet. So where we are is that the decision on franchising, as you say, Chair, is to be considered at a meeting of South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority Board in March. We are aware of the direction of travel, and we're having conversations with South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, so that the grant scheme that we ultimately launch will be reflective of the potential type of operation that will be undertaken through that franchise model. So we won't be launching our scheme with operators until after that decision, and there will be further conversations with South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority colleagues to ensure that any grant terms and conditions reflect the public subsidy into the buses and the charging infrastructure at this point, and that will be reflected in any further change of the kind of rollout and implementation of franchising, should that be the decision in March.
Thank you, Tom. I will allow Councillor Gamble-Pewter to kind of ask a supplementary, and then we'll go to Councillor Chaplin. Councillor Gamble-Pewter.
Thanks for indulging me, Chair. I have actually now managed to formulate what was a political rant into some actual factual questions.
Are you still super grumpy?
Well, I mean, it's frustrating, isn't it?
Excellent.
So my question is, am I right in thinking that the fleet that this public money is investing in is owned by the private sector operators? Then do we know whether, if franchising comes into play in the future, would it cost us more money to transfer stuff back into the public if effectively our public investment has increased the value of the infrastructure? And thirdly, are there any levers that we have to obligate the private operators to invest more in upgrading and electrifying their infrastructure? Thank you.
Tom, are you okay to come back on that question before we go to Councillor Chaplin?
Yes, thank you. Yes, in Sheffield, all of the bus fleet in operation is owned by the private operators. That's with the exception of the 4 Sheffield Connect EV buses that are owned by South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority and are leased to the current provider. The cost recovery in terms of the public subsidy into either new fleet or we are looking at part of our EV bus scheme at the potential for full EV repower of fleet as a potential option, which is more affordable than clearly a new EV bus. We are looking at the terms and conditions associated with our grant at this stage to ensure that should franchising be approved and ultimately implemented, that the model of that franchising is one where South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority would own the fleet and all of the depots. So in terms of that buyback, we are looking at an appropriate way of evaluating the subsidy that is going in at this stage at the point where any of that fleet may be purchased by South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority at a point in time for the future associated with the different phases of franchising. And we're working through that from kind of that total kind of investment at this stage. It's fair to say that some of the useful conversations we've had with bus operators, they have themselves highlighted that we're not necessarily in a uniquely new position, and that in Manchester, for example, as part of their transition towards a franchise network, that there was a desire to see to use, again, public subsidies to support the accelerated rollout of EV vehicles before franchising effectively took effect, and those provisions were put in place as part of the work in Manchester. So we're learning from that. In terms of the levers for bus operators to invest more, I think that's challenging at the moment. In terms of the natural lever is the fund that we are creating. So there is a benefit, and we've had these positive discussions with operators around the benefits of them moving to an electrified fleet. The franchising decision, if it's positive, there'll be phasing of the rollout of that franchising. So there will be operational benefit for some operators to engage with us now and implement an EV transition, but that is the main lever that we have at the moment.
Thank you, Tom, for answering Councillor Campbell-Pugh's question. Councillor Chaplin, was there a question from you?
Yes, I'm just, I mean, I welcome this. It's really good news. It's not quite 10% of the fleet in Sheffield, but it's going in the right direction. I'm just wondering that in putting that money out there into getting those electric buses, which are much needed, are we leasing them so that we're getting a financial return as well as a clean air return on this? And if so, who would that be coming from? Or are these, once these buses are built, are they effectively being handed over to the Combined Mayoral Authority to use as part of the franchising process? Just trying to understand a bit more about that.
Thank you. The position is that at this time, the scheme will work in that we will have the ability to provide bus operators with a proportion of funding associated with the costs of that move to EV. So it's that cost difference between what it would cost a bus operator to buy a diesel bus and an electric bus, and we're able to pay 75% of that difference. Similarly, with the costs of the electrification of their depots and the charging infrastructure required to support those vehicles. So it is a grant to the private operator. The majority of the costs that are associated with that transition and adoption of EV vehicles would come from them as a commercial entity. So this is where we need them to see, you know, an advantage in moving forward with EV at this time, with the support that we're providing. But those buses would be owned by the commercial operator. We will have terms and conditions associated with our grants that we provide them with that cover off how those buses should be used and where they should be used and over what periods. And there will also be, given the fact that there will be a decision soon on franchising, and if that is a positive decision, that model will require South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority to enter into negotiations through the different phases of franchising to purchase both depots and vehicles from operators. So it will need to reflect the subsidy in at the moment, and subject to the timescales associated with that buyback, the value of that public subsidy. So what we don't want, and everybody acknowledges this, is that public funding going in at this point, yes, to get those benefits of that early transition to EV in line with our air quality priorities and the need to really move forward and improve some of our key hotspots in the city, but also that need to transition towards zero emission fleet in line with our climate objectives, that there is that subsidy at this stage, but the value of that will be reflected and captured in grant terms and conditions. We are still working on those, and we are using that learning that some of our operators have from their experiences in Manchester, and we're working closely with South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority to ensure that those are robust enough to support this transition at this stage, with the awareness that franchising may well be coming down the road in a not too distant future.
Thank you for that, Tom. That's very clear. If I could just follow up a little bit more. I mean, nearly all of that answers what I was really helpful. Sorry, I keep putting myself down as Craig and I'm Mike. No, I just wondered whether a leasing arrangement might have been more financially beneficial to Sheffield, or whether that's and the other thing is with the terms and conditions, and I'm glad you went into some of that. Do those terms and conditions stop those buses from being used in other local authorities? Although obviously some bus routes do go, say, from, as we know, the Sheffield to Doncaster, the now number 5 route. I get that some buses would cross authorities in South Yorkshire, but do those terms and conditions stop these buses being lifted out of the Sheffield area and put 100 miles down the road in the West Midlands or somewhere?
Yeah, thank you for that. The terms and conditions will cover the fact that they will need to be operated on the routes that we agree with the operators. So we will be taking a targeted approach here. It's not just whether a bus operator in the city wants to transition to cleaner zero-emission vehicles, but we want to see that that fleet is targeted on certain routes through the city. We know that locations such as Arundel Gate, there's a number of buses that go through there, but Waingate also, and I should not forget to mention that we are under a joint direction with Rotherham, and there are certain corridors in Rotherham, Fitzwilliam Road, where buses are a contributing factor towards their air quality exceedance. So we're going to be taking a focused position with the bus operators to target those corridors where the air quality is highest, and we will kind of work with them in terms of setting out terms and conditions that the buses need to be operated on those corridors. So they will be locked in that sense into the city. We don't want these driven around Derby, however lovely Derby might be. These are to improve Sheffield's air quality.
Thank you, Tom. Do I have any other questions for Tom on the report? I don't. That therefore moves us into the second part of discussing this item. If colleagues wish to make any other points that don't require a clarification for Tom, so this would be an opportunity to debate if people felt the need this particular item. I know Councillor Gamble-Pugh said that there might be something that he might want to reflect on later. Perhaps he might have already covered that. I can see that Councillor Diamond wishes to make a contribution.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, really welcome this report and the progress in terms of air quality and the our existing vehicles in terms of the success of the clean air zone, and welcome the approach going forward. I'm really excited about the prospect of having some electric buses in Sheffield. I'd just like to reflect on the comments made about we've got 400 buses in Sheffield. I think we could make much faster progress in terms of having an electrified fleet if we would consider a workplace parking levy. In Nottingham, that raised about 10 million direct investment per year, 1 billion in match funding over 10 years, and all of that money was invested in public transport and active travel, which meant that they could extend their tram network and electrified buses. And I think it's a model that could be used in Sheffield, and if we were serious about climate change and about electrifying the bus fleet, that's something that we should adopt. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. Do I have any other colleague who wishes to make a contribution? I don't. So, in summarising, in fact, I do. Councillor Gamble-Pugh. Councillor Gamble-Pugh.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that overall, I think this is to be welcomed. I would like us to carefully monitor as the period for grants for upgrading of commercial vehicles draws to a conclusion. We may see that the funds that were previously diverted to that become available, and I would like to see how much more quickly we could divert that in future financial periods to electrifying the rest of the bus fleet with as much speed as we can. I think it's really important that the messages about the work that officers have outlined about how carefully we're safeguarding the investment of that public money, so that we work towards this infrastructure and these buses, the depots coming back into closer public control under franchising, but retaining the value of this public investment. I think it's really important for people to understand, because at the moment people are quite rightly extremely frustrated with the poor service that people perceive is being provided by these private bus companies. I think people who, if anybody in my ward were to be looking at this webcast, I think they'd be really surprised if I didn't reflect the amount of frustration that I know there is throughout Ecclesfield and Chapeltown and Parsons Cross, in just how difficult and how increasingly expensive it is to get to school, to college, to work on these unreliable, polluting buses. So the more we can demonstrate that we're putting this money in to support a better service, but also as part of continuing to clean up air quality and increase the quality of life and health outcomes for people across this city, I think that's really crucial. And I think, absolutely, we should be looking at all possible sources of funding to accelerate it further. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gamble-Pugh. So, in, I guess, summation of the discussions that we've had today, I think we've heard a variety of points from colleagues in all of their contributions. I think we've heard some really understandable frustrations that the last government's retrofit solution has failed, but also the fact that it took so long for them to admit to that. But we've also heard colleagues welcoming this £11.5 million investment. I think it's probably important to say, isn't it, that as colleagues have reflected, that this is primarily going to be going into buses that transit through the areas that have the greatest air quality challenges in our city, and that's going to be baked into the terms and conditions with bus operators, which has been confirmed today through the questions that colleagues have asked. And I think it's important to ask ourselves why that's important. We know it's really important, isn't it? Because actually we know that poor air quality in our city contributes to at least 500 premature deaths in our city each year, which is not acceptable. And of course we know, as people have mentioned, that it's not just about our bus fleet, it's also about the infrastructure needed to charge those vehicles at speed, and the proposals that we have today and that we're going to be voting on in a second also support that. And I think, as Tom has said, in March we're going to be taking that historic decision to take back control of our buses in this region. We've heard colleagues ask questions about how these proposals would fit with that change of ownership of buses in a situation where Simca would own the fleet and depots. Now clearly that's quite complex, but I'm sure that colleagues will agree that it is right that we take this decision now and don't wait a few years for bus franchising to be in place. And also we've heard reflections from officers about Manchester and their journey to electrify their fleet and how they took similar steps before franchising to deal with this issue and to deal with that as part of their commercial negotiations that were needed to buy back buses and get a good deal on behalf of residents in the city to retain, as Councillor Gamble-Pugh said, the value of this investment. So I certainly welcome this item. I know that members of the committee do as well. The report contains recommendations for our approval, which we need to vote on. They're on page 41 of your agenda pack. Can I ask colleagues whether we are all agreed? And of course, if any member wishes to dissent, then please do raise your hand. Can I see nodding if colleagues agree to our £11.5 million of the investment to electrify at least 30 buses in the city to deal with dirty air? Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. That item has been carried enthusiastically, and Tom, thank you very much for bringing this. Thank you very much to officers as well for working with government to ensure that we have this support to be able to bring this forward, so it's really appreciated. That therefore takes us to item 9, which is about the Walkley 20-mile-an-hour speed limit order, and this is an objection report that Lisa is going to run us through today, just for members of the committee and anyone watching from home. That's on page 59 of your agenda pack. Lisa, welcome back, and thank you very much for the work on this.
Thank you, and I'm going to embrace this moment in case I'm delegated locally next time, so thank you for that. So this is a consultation report for the Walkley 20-mile-an-hour scheme, which I know that the committee is familiar with now. In line with other schemes, we've had 135 emails of support, some people really emphatically supporting the scheme, and just 27 objections. Many of the objections seem to be talking about the ATN that was recently installed in Walkley, sort of rehashing the objection that they had previously, and just thinking that this scheme is just another sort of war on the motorist from the council. A lot of people also think that the scheme doesn't go far enough, which is good in one sense because it feels like people really want the scheme to be expanded on, but in line with keeping within budget and making sure that everybody has equal opportunity and investment. We do stick to the priority list as much as we can. As Councillor Sanger will know, we did do a little bit extra in Fullwood, and this scheme in Walkley did start off slightly smaller, working with the leader whose constituency this is and the other members. We did make the scheme slightly bigger. So, you know, as you can imagine, no matter how far you go, somebody will always want you to go slightly further. In parallel to this, we are looking at Heavygate Road specifically, in line with the ATN being made permanent and possibly making that 20 mile an hour and adding some other measures to that too. And I think that's it. So the recommendation is for the objections to be noted and overruled and the scheme to be implemented.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for taking us through that report. Do I see any colleagues who have any questions or comments? I will go to Councillor Shaw first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lisa, for the report. It's very heartening to see that 83% of residents support the scheme, which is more or less in line with the sometimes up to 99% support that we've had for previous schemes, and that 20 mile an hour zones are generally supported by residents across the city. I noticed that on the consultation letter that included some FAQs which address some of the most commonly asked questions or objections, which is something that I requested in a previous meeting. So I'm pleased to see that has gone forward. Has that made any change to the composition of the objections? Is it covering most people's questions or queries?
Thank you for that, and it was an amazing suggestion. I definitely think it has combated a lot of the questions. I think in some aspects it's kind of given people a bit of a leverage to almost tell us that we're lying and the information that we've given is not correct. So whether it's reduced or just giving people a little bit more of a lever to almost attack us with, I'm not sure. Every consultation we do learn something. So for instance, Walkley, people were telling us that the objection deadline wasn't quite clear, so I've manoeuvred that into a little bit more of a different space. We have actually had somebody tell us that the myth busting almost has been amazing to see, and they're going to use it in some of their consultation letters. So I think it's definitely a welcome approach, and I do keep adding to it. Every consultation you do learn something different. So yeah, I definitely think it's, and as you can see with the numbers, 27 objections, and I don't think many of them were about the things that we touch on in the FAQs. So I definitely think it's helped.
If I may, thank you, Chair. I mean, I had a constituent contact me recently because, like many councillors, they want 20 mile an hour zone in their area. In this particular area, they wanted a 20 mile zone around the Abbey Lane area in Beecham and Greenhill ward. Now, according to the list of 20 mile an hours, there's about 120 areas, of which only over the past 10 years or so, only 52 have been implemented so far. So, fortunately, in some ways, Abbey Lane is right near the bottom due to the number of casualties in that area, or lack of casualties in that area. So it may take at least 10 years for a 20 mile an hour zone to be proposed for that area at the current rate of about 4 to 6 zones per year. Is with the adoption of Appy Way and other things, is the rate of 20 mile an hour zones being implemented likely to increase? Is there any scope that, now we've got this new technology, that we can do more zones at the same time, covering more of the city? Because we would like to eventually see all of the residential areas in Sheffield covered by 20 mile an hour zones.
Thank you, and I think when we first started this project in 2012, 2025 seemed like a long time away, and we expected to be at the bottom of the list by now, I'm sure. So yeah, with Appy Way, traffic regulation orders are much quicker. It still requires a certain amount of process, such as sign off of request to advertise. There's a lot of legal implications. But we are trying to streamline the process with every one of these we do. We've recently had some new staff in our office who I'm kind of training up to do more of the sort of business case, financial background. So we're hoping that in the next sort of couple of years you will see these really sort of blow up. So we are quite keen on getting to the bottom of the list as quick as possible, and trying to, in the meantime, figure out how to do that. And you're right, Appy Way is definitely going to help with that. It's less resource intensive. and staff on our team will definitely be helping with that. Obviously, you guys see the LTP programme come before you every year, and with the allocation given to 20-man-hour schemes, you know, obviously if we did want to put some more money towards that, something else would obviously have to fall by the wayside, but obviously that's within the gift of the committee to make a decision of where the priorities lie.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Councillor Mercereau.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the report. I have some comments, a couple of questions and a suggested action for the committee. I found the answers in the FAQ section really valuable, and I learned quite a lot in there. Some really useful information, for example, that journey times are largely dictated by junction conditions and not vehicle speeds, and that 20-mile-an-hour schemes don't add to bus journey times, which is really useful information. I noticed in the objections that many of the commenters were concerned about the lack of speed enforcement, which I know is a policing issue, and I'll come back to that later. And also about the amount of pavement parking in the area as well. And it's also good to hear you say just now that Heavygate Road is being considered, because I think it would simplify things and confirm that it was not being considered as a main road. It was highlighted that by a few people that Heavygate Road, especially between Northfield Road and Howard Road, has had extra and fast-moving traffic on it, probably as a result of the weakening of the LTN. I know this, we're not discussing the ATN today, but it is related. Do we know why the second filter on Matlock Road hasn't been put in? Because presumably the issue of the motorhome access isn't an issue anymore, because bin lorries can access the road. So that was my question, and my suggestion for the committee is that we write to Mayor Coppard to highlight and press the need for more road policing in general, because this is one key factor in improving driver standards, and also would be a really important step in moving towards a reduction in collision injuries and deaths. So I'd like that to be an action for our committee to take forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm glad you learned something from the FAQs. I did too while doing all of this research. You know, we kept getting the same sort of questions asked about air quality, and it's going to make my bus journey, my journey in general, much faster. You know, changing gears and acceleration and braking is going to cause an issue. So I thought it was well worth the time following Councillor Shaw's recommendation to just put some more effort into that and direct people to the FAQs and just say, before you object on these grounds, please just have a look at, and it shows people where the information came from as well, in case they want to do some of their own reading. In terms of the filter on Matlock, it's not within my workload, but my colleague is dealing with that, so I can get back to you on that, if that's all right, Councillor Mercereau. But we have done some speed surveys on Heavygate recently, which I'm not sure of the actual data, but it does suggest that Heavygate Road would meet the criteria for inclusion in a 20-mile-an-hour scheme. So I'm guessing the medium speed came out fairly low. But again, I can get some more information when we come back to you on the Matlock. In terms of enforcement, you know, always a big issue. I mean, luckily, we are carrying out a review of all of our 20-mile-an-hour schemes, and the indications from the speed surveys are that most people are in compliance. But I think it's a really good suggestion to talk about enforcement with the Mayor. Also, pavement parking, as you know from some of my other schemes I manage, is a complete, you know, bane of our lives. We are working with a DFT who did a consultation several years ago about how to manage it in more residential areas without the signs necessary for what we used in the city centre. So I'll catch up with our traffic regulations team about where that currently is, and hopefully figure out how to put some of these enforcement measures in residential areas where it is most needed.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And Councillor Mercereau did bring forward a suggestion, didn't she, there, which I think we should probably reflect on at the end as well of our discussion and debate. And she was particularly interested in how we impact decision making at Simca when it comes to policing priorities. And I think that should be something we can discuss shortly. Are there any other questions from colleagues? No, I don't think they are, but I guess in summation it's probably important to say, isn't it, before kind of dealing with Councillor Mercereau's particular point and suggestion there, that we've heard lots of contributions about how we can speed up the delivery of 20-mile-an-hour zones. And I think that was a really interesting comment, wasn't it, from Councillor Shaw, about how tools like Appiways and the advancement that we've seen in the transport team can assist us to really turbocharge the delivery of 20-mile-an-hour schemes that are brought forward with local support, because these are always brought forward with local support of residents. And I know that particularly in this case, and we're making a decision, aren't we, on one in Walkley, that this has been advocated by the local councillors there, Councillor Wright, who is on our committee but is ill and cannot be part of our decision making today, Councillor Hunt and Councillor McLean. I think there was one very important point towards the end of our discussion, wasn't there, that Councillor Merzero made, and it was about something that we would all agree with, about the need for a really robust policing response when it comes to speed, and something that Councillor Merzero says about driver behaviour, and she's very right about that. It's important to say, and those people who are part of the police and crime panel will know this, but Simca's just conducted a consultation on policing priorities. And that's really important because it's part of the development of the police and crime plan. And as I understand it, that plan will really better reflect many of the issues that are really close to our hearts here in Sheffield, and particularly how we can achieve Vision Zero, which is our commitment as a council to eliminating all fatalities and serious injuries on Sheffield's roads. So I'm assured that work is in place with that development of the updated police and crime plan, and as part of that consultation exercise that's happening, that actually there will be a change of approach when it comes to policing priorities with regards to many of these issues that we care about. Of course, we could choose to write to Mayor Coppard. I'm not sure that necessarily that is the best and most productive course of action. I think we do have discussions almost on a weekly basis with Simca. Simca are part of our knowledge briefings, colleagues from the active travel team that are really taking a lead on the development of that particular aspect of the police and crime plan, are in dialogue with us on a day-to-day basis effectively, and I'd like us to continue to have those discussions with them. But Councillor Merzero, I'd welcome your reflections.
I think it's really good to keep the discussions going with the Mayor, but I really welcome an update on the change of approach regarding policing, road policing in particular rather.
I think that is something, if the committee is mindful, that we could take forward, and we could certainly take forward as an action point that we should ask Simca for an update on those matters that you've talked about with regards to the kind of development of the police and crime plan, how it's going to be working and fitting in with our aspiration for Vision Zero, you know, how it's going to be enabling better driver behaviour and lower speeds and safer roads across the city. So if you're content with that, and if colleagues are content with that, we'll record that request and we'll make sure that that's actioned, and perhaps bring it back as part of one of our knowledge briefings. Thank you. I can see you nodding. That's brilliant. Thank you. So that therefore takes us to a decision point about this particular item. And Lisa, thank you very much for bringing it forward today, and the work that you do behind the scenes to make it happen. The recommendations for your consideration, colleagues, are on page 61. I think I know the answer, but are we all agreed? If we are, can I have some nodding? Thank you. Absolutely, some good nodding, and if, of course, any member wishes to dissent, they would raise their hand, and I don't see anyone raising their hand. So that item has been carried. Lisa, thank you very much for the work on that, and we'll look forward to seeing the Walkley 20-mile-an-hour speed limit order kicking into force. Thank you. That takes us to item 10 on our agenda today. So for those people watching at home and who are in the meeting, we're on page 115 of the agenda pack, and Tom Finnegan-Smith is back to run us through this item. I think it's probably important just to kind of set the scene a little bit. We know that the Stocksbridge Towns Fund is chaired by a local resident alongside the local MP as well, and it includes lots of different stakeholders in the community. by and large, they're the group of people who are driving forward this agenda, and they are the people who are also working with our officers to make sure that the many schemes that are part of the Stocksbridge Towns Fund projects are implemented as well. This is one particular aspect of it, and we're really excited about it, but Tom is going to run us through it. Tom, as I understand it, I think you're also going to tell us as a committee about one particular technical change that you'd like to make to the recommendations that you might reflect on. Just for your awareness, I have made sure that members of the committee are updated about the wording of that, so they should all have that on their laptops.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there will be one slight addition to the recommendations presented in the report, and I'll cover those off. So thank you. As part of the Stocksbridge Towns Fund programme, proposals for a Stocksbridge hopper bus have been developed as one of the key priorities of the Towns Fund Board. And that's to improve public transport access within Stocksbridge, importantly to connect to the facilities within Stocksbridge, supporting the local economy, but also onto some of those wider public transport connections. The purpose of today's report is to seek approval to become accountable body for £250,000 of transport innovation funding from South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, and to award grant funding of up to £245,000 of that funding combined with some of the Stocksbridge Towns Fund revenue funding to South Pennine Community Transport, who are the proposed operator of the hopper bus service. The full grant agreement will consist of capital and revenue funding. Previously, on the 20th of January, the Finance and Performance Policy Committee have approved capital funding of £615,900 towards this project. So this report only covers the revenue funding, which, as I mentioned, is £10,000 from Stocksbridge Towns from revenue funding and £235,000 from the Simca Transport Innovation Fund. The full amount of funding provided through that grant will be used to enable the purchase of up to 4 buses, together with the operation, covering the operational costs of delivering the local hopper bus service for a period of 5 years. After the 5-year period, funding will be complete, and the services are expected to be self-sustaining at that point through fare box income. No further financial support is proposed beyond that initial 5 years. In terms of the recommendations, I'll cover those and add in the additional one. The additional one, I should explain, is required to provide cash flow cover between the time it will take us to complete the grant acceptance of the funding from South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, but also the period, more immediate period of needing to confirm the grant award to South Pennine Community Transport. The recommendations are as they are set out within the report. So those first 2 recommendations: to approve the council becoming a accountable body for £250,000 of transport innovation funding, and secondly, to approve the council awarding the revenue grant funding of up to £245,000 and enter into a grant agreement with South Pennine as detailed in the report, and note that the full grant amount is £860,000 and £900 when the capital element is included. The further recommendation is to approve the council using up to £100,000 of Stocksbridge Towns Fund revenue funding to cash flow the Towns Fund hopper bus project until the Transport Innovation Fund agreement is completed with South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority and grant claims submitted and funding received. So it is that cash flowing period between the award of the grant to South Pennine and that receipt of the funding from South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. It should be noted that the TIF funding has been approved by South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, and we do have a draft agreement, but the ongoing work to clarify the claims process and sign the grant agreement to complete that is still underway. So it is considered low risk in terms of the cash flow position that we are recommending today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom, for running us through that report about the hopper bus in Stocksbridge. Do I see any colleagues wishing to make a point or ask a question? I will go straight to Councillor Vidler, primarily because it's her ward as well, isn't it? Councillor Vidler.
It is indeed my ward, yes, and thank you for that report. Really good to hear, and particularly thanks, of course, for the support that we're going to get from Oliver Coppard and the Mayoral Authority. I mean, I think of all the schemes, past and present, that have been put forward by the Towns Fund Board, this is probably the most popular and the one that has resonated most with the population of what is quite an isolated and largely rural part of the city, where we have got areas, small villages like Bolsterstone and places like Smithy Moor, which have absolutely no public transport links. And so there has been and still is a great reliance on private transport and on private cars that really we would look to try and break with and to improve people's opportunities to use public transport more, and thus supporting active travel. I've seen drafts of the routes that have been proposed, and I hope that those are going to be confirmed fairly imminently, because as I see from the draft routes, which I know are to be decided by the operator rather than the council, that they get to decide on the routes, the timings and the frequency of these routes. But if they are going to do as promised and serve these remote communities and connect us through to Northern College and Barnsley and Thurgoland, as well as providing circular routes around Deepcar and Stocksbridge, then that is exactly what we need to really try and to get us connected. Obviously, then hopefully the next step will be to get an improved connection between Stocksbridge into the city centre. But this will be a huge advantage. It will connect people to doctors, to schools, to services. It will get people out of their cars, and I really am hopeful that we will get a sustainable service which will see us beyond the 5 years of the funded programme. So thanks for that report. I hope that we can all look forward to seeing the buses on the road very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vidler, for your kind words, but also the advocacy that you've made on behalf of residents in Stocksbridge and the surrounding villages on this particular issue to improve public transport. Councillor Diamond.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, really welcome this report and proposal as well, because it is vital that we have good quality, reliable and affordable and accessible public transport for everyone in our city, including rural and remote communities, and particularly for those who are unable to afford or unable to drive a private motor vehicle. I do have two questions. First one, bearing in mind our previous agenda item, will the hopper bus be electric? Is the first question. And can you give more details about the demand responsive aspect, or if there are any details at this stage? Thank you.
Tom, if you could reflect on Councillor Diamond's points, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to confirm that the buses won't be electric. They will be diesel buses. They're not your standard large single deckers. They are kind of a medium-sized bus. A large kind of executive type minibus, which is fully wheelchair accessible and DDA compliant. Apologies, your other question was around, can you remind me your second question?
Yeah, sorry. In the report, it talks about having a demand responsive aspect to the
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Diamond. The demand responsive element, as I understand it, that the operator will be flexible on some of the route that is established in response to customer demand. So there will be the opportunity for individuals to effectively request that the bus serves them more closely to their home, for example, to assist them in using the service to access Stocksbridge and the services and facilities that are there. So that will be done on not a dial-a-ride type perspective, but there will be a facility for customers to kind of request that service. And again, on their return journey, that they would be able to acknowledge that with the driver. So there will be a distance, a kind of a maximum deviation from the route, but that is how the demand responsive element is being proposed. Again, as Councillor Riddler mentioned earlier, there are discussions at the moment to finalise the routes that are proposed. Again, when that is confirmed and the service is nearing its launch, there will be communication around what those routes are and how people can engage in that kind of demand responsive element, and the provider will be doing that as part of the launch of the service.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. In some ways, a little bit prompted by Councillor Diamond's questions, but will these the buses will they be permitted to carry cycles, for instance, or is it wheelchair only? And presumably there'll be space for buggies and prams and etc.
Yeah, that's right. So there will be accessible vehicles. I do not think that they will, as other buses do not, allow a full-size bike to be taken onto them. Folding bikes can be taken on buses at the moment, and I expect that would continue to be the case in appropriate circumstances, providing there's space and other things that the operator sees as appropriate. So I expect that kind of general position will apply to the service.
Thank you, Tom. Do I see any of the colleagues wishing to make a contribution? I don't. Do I see any colleagues who wish to debate this item? I don't. So therefore, we will move on to voting on this item in a second. I guess it's probably important to say, and many of us will have knocked on doors speaking to residents in Stocksbridge, just how hilly Stocksbridge is, and therefore just how welcome these hopper buses will be for people, not least in Stocksbridge, but also connecting up communities and surrounding villages. And I know from Councillor Riddler is here today, Councillor Whitaker, and also the local MP Marie Tidball as Vice Chair of the Stocksbridge Town Fund Board have been really making the case for better public transport in Stocksbridge and the surrounding villages. And I think it's also important to reflect on Councillor Riddler's points that she made, that this is an important step to improving public transport in Stocksbridge and the surrounding villages, but it's also a precursor to lots of other exciting things that we are hoping to bring forward to improve public transport in that part of our city, and particularly about tram expansion, which we are all working at speed alongside South Yorkshire's Mayor Oliver Coppard to deliver as well. So we're hoping some very exciting improvements to public transport in Stocksbridge and the surrounding village as well. So thank you, Tom, for bringing the item forward, but also to Sean's team as well, Sean's Regen team for bringing this forward, and I can see the colleagues from that team are in the room today. The item for our voting approval, if the committee is minded to do so, is on page 118. We did say, didn't we, as part of Tom's contribution to discussions, that it was going to have one additional part to the recommendation, and that addition was going to read to also approve the council using up to 100,000 Stocksbridge Council Fund funding to cash flow the Stocksbridge Town Fund Hopper project until the Transport Innovation Fund agreement is completed with Simca and grant claims submitted and funding is received. And Tom explained that to the committee and the rationale to do so. So can I ask colleagues whether they're minded to support this proposal and vote in favour of it? Obviously, if they're not, then please do raise your hand to show us your discontent. Can I see people nodding if they're in support? Absolutely. Colleagues are in support, so therefore that has been carried, and we've therefore approved the new hopper bus as part of the Stocksbridge Towns Fund. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, colleagues, for bringing that forward. Item 11 is the Attercliffe Regeneration Framework public consultation, and it's page 127 of your agenda pack, and Ruth and Alan are going to run us through it today. Thank you very much, Ruth and Alan.
So, are we ready? Shall I start? So I hope you've all had an opportunity to read through the draft document. If you haven't, I'm going to give you some highlights in this short presentation. So my main reason for being here today is to provide an update on the progress of the Attercliffe Regeneration Framework document and to seek authority to proceed with an external consultation exercise with stakeholders. Some of you may remember I came in September and gave the full background to the summary of ongoing projects in Attercliffe, and as part of that I promised to come back once the internal consultation on the draft report had been made in the autumn. These revisions from that internal consultation have been incorporated into the document by our consultants WSP, and that's why I'm back here today. Next slide, please. So I've just covered that. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the Attercliffe Regeneration Framework study area. As you can see, it covers the area east of the Don, west of the canal, to the north, east, incorporating the Olympic Legacy Park, and to the south, incorporating the Woodburn Road area around the tram stop. Next slide, please. As part of the document, there are 6 vision areas within it. The first one is Sherland Square, which is located to the southwest of the document, which is near Attercliffe tram stop. The second goes along the High Street. Third to the further south around Stanford Road. Fourth, adjacent to that, on Darnell Road. Fifth, northeast up towards the Olympic Legacy Park, and 6 is Gateway North, which is the area adjacent to the Adelphi, former Adelphi Cinema. Next slide, please. So just a brief few points on the policy context and the aims of this document. Formally, the Attercliffe Area Action Plan, as you can see, is now out of date, and that's the current guidance we've got. It's in your documents as Appendix 3. And this new draft document, Regeneration Framework, provides an update on the previous projects that have been delivered in this time period and outlines a strategic framework for the potential project delivery for the next 15 years up to 2040. So it aims to provide a new vision to market the regeneration of the area and identify and focus on suitable sites for new house building and mixed-use developments. Next slide, please. As you can see, it aligns with council plan outcomes. I'll not read them all out, but one of the main ones is to create great neighbourhoods for people to call home, outlining potential locations for almost 1,800 new homes and a variety of mixed uses. It will assist in promoting further investment and the re-establishment of a coherent census space, place and community in Attercliffe, and to strengthen the links with the rest of the city, again over the next 10 to 15 years, and linking with the core elements of the council plan within the 6 project areas that I've just outlined previously. Next slide, please. Some pictures, because I think we probably all need them at this time of the day. These are some of the CGIs, computer-generated images, that are in the document. This is Area 1, Sheffield Square, which the orientation is from the tram stop and heading towards the High Street to the right-hand side of the CGI. Next slide, please. And this is the area on Stocksbridge Road over the canal with some of the vision documents in the draft framework. Next slide, please. So we have already engaged in to shape the draft document consultation with stakeholders, the MP, the East Area LAC, and we've also been in contact with the stakeholders through the Attercliffe Area Board. Next slide, please. So moving on to the proposed timetable and the strategy. So we're looking to commence the public consultation April-May this year via online survey as well as in-person workshops that you can see outlined below. One workshop will be in the Attercliffe area and another one is more targeted towards younger people in a youth focus group, and both will have the oversight in looking at local affordable housing needs and aspirations for the area. Next slide, please. So this consideration has been made in conjunction with the, I've lost the screen, emerging Sheffield plan, and the timings have been agreed with strategic planning to ensure there's no conflict with our consultation timetable. And this public can we go back please? Sorry, thank you. This public consultation exercise will move the document a step closer to its adoption as guidance, and it will enable it to have greater weight in planning terms, guiding future development proposals in the area and supporting the delivery of the emerging Sheffield plan policies. Next slide, please. And that's just about the council plan outcomes and how this document aligns with those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for taking us through that particular framework. It's really appreciated, and some really important work that's happening down there in Attercliffe again. It's important, isn't it, to say, and the document does talk about that this is driven forward by an area board in Attercliffe, again chaired by a local MP, Clive Betts, but also having on it a number of stakeholders from that community, both community but also business stakeholders that are really important in the dynamic and driving forward development there. And we're really excited particularly to see many of the different images that are being drawn together about some of the fabulous regeneration that is going to be occurring over the next few years. Do I see any colleagues who wish to ask a question? Councillor Merzera.
Thanks very much for the report. It's really great to read that, and it's really exciting to hear about all the changes being planned. I've got a few questions. I noticed on page 135, 9.2, it talks about minimising public transport use. I'm presuming that's a typo and it should be maximising. Yeah. Page 143, I see that there's aspirations to create a more welcoming environment and street scene. I'd like to make the point that currently Attercliffe High Street is completely littered with parked vehicles in clear breach of double yellow lines and loading restrictions. And I'd like to ask, as a committee, that we request much more robust and frequent enforcement of that area, because it would be a really important step in making that area more attractive to visitors and residents. Before the new traffic schemes are implemented, it could really start to bring more visitors into the area. At the moment, it's a really hostile street scene, especially if you're on foot. There's, like I say, lots of parked vehicles completely obstructing the pavement. I frequently see vehicles being driven on and off the pavement, which is a real danger. On page 149, it talks about a network of cycle footpaths in close proximity to Attercliffe, which are accessible to local residents and workers.
So I'm sorry, are you referring to the page numbers in the document or in the committee report?
In the committee report.
Okay.
Just a second.
So our copy of the document, it stops at 136, and we've got some page numbers that you're quoting that go beyond that, so we're just struggling to find the paragraph you refer to.
Okay. I'd have to read through it at speed, and I don't know if I'll be able to do that just at the moment. I'll see if I can find the page numbers, but...
So for those people who might be watching at home, we're just clarifying at the moment some of the page numbering so that officers have an opportunity to be able to kind of reflect on Councillor Merzero's points. I think there's some ambiguity about kind of page numbering.
We're with you now. Carry on.
Okay. So page 149, there's mention of a network of cycle footpaths in close proximity to Attercliffe, and it mentions the canal corridor and Five Wears Walk. I'd say that these currently aren't very accessible at the moment, especially to women. Much of the network's not properly lit, it's not signed, and there's a large area of Five Wears Walk that has been closed for quite some time. I'm aware of several muggings along here, and I frequently cycle to and from Attercliffe, and that area is not a route that I would use myself much of the time. So my question is, will the existing network that you refer to be updated at all as part of this scheme, so that it can be accessible at all times to all people? This is separate from the TCF scheme that is mentioned in the report. And my final question, on page 157, there's mention of high quality cycle facilities. Could you tell us more about that? Thank you very much.
Thank you for all those questions. Now that I've got onto the right page that you were talking about, they're all comments in the draft document that we're going to go out to consultation on. So we will take those comments from you and feed those back into the consultation process to work that in. I think what we're trying to do in this document is to set out some aspirations and not just planned activity. So it's a balance between the two. Not everything that's in this document is funded or can be implemented, but it's there to try and set a vision and an aspiration for the future. I think that covers most of the questions. And the specifics around the parking, this is a live issue that is discussed at the area board. I believe colleagues from parking are coming to the next board to present a report on how we might deal with some of those issues moving forward. So we know about it, and we're trying to do something about it. What I would say is that the planned Darnall to Attercliffe to City Centre cycle scheme down Attercliffe Road in particular will help in trying to deal with some of those issues immediately.
It was, thank you for that. It was more taking action in the meantime before that scheme is implemented, because it's a real issue at the moment, and it would really help to kind of develop the area as an attractive place in the meantime before that's properly put in. Thank you. Thank you for answering the questions.
Thank you. Do I see any other colleague who wishes to ask a question or wishes to debate the item? Councillor Diamond and then Councillor Campbell-Pugh.
Sorry, it was just linked to what Ruth was saying. I mean, it came across in the report about the parking issues really strongly. Page 149, 157, page 170, and it's referred to as informal parking, but just want to clarify what we're talking about is unenforced obstructive parking, which much of that we do have the powers to enforce, but currently are not doing so.
Councillor Diamond, I guess your points are really legitimate points. I wonder whether they're perhaps questions for our transport colleagues, perhaps, and perhaps ones that we might be able to reflect on as part of our joint task and finish group with Waste and Street Scene on that very issue of parking. And I don't doubt that particular issue of, problem parking in Attercliffe, but I see Sean indicating that he'd like to contribute.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Thanks, Councillor Hammond. As Alan mentioned, I think probably just to expand on that, there is a bit of a working group because there's a number of unauthorised parking issues around Attercliffe. Part of the Levelling Up Fund scheme that we've delivered down there has improved some of the car parks, and there's a lot of indiscriminate parking and vehicles in those as well. So whether it's fly tipping, long-term parking issues or the parking on the high street, there is a working group that has sort of cross-council representatives on that, looking at what we can do to resolve some of these long-standing and ongoing parking issues across Attercliffe. And it is something that the local MP is also very vocal and active about, to ensure that we try and get a resolution to some of those to improve the area.
Thank you. I'm smiling because I know that the local MP is very active on these issues and does send us lots of emails on it as well. Do I see any other colleagues? In fact, I do. I think I had Councillor Gamble-Pugh, and I think then I had Councillor Sanger. Councillor Gamble-Pugh.
Are we in comments now rather than questions, Chair?
It's entirely up to you, I think, Councillor Gamble-Pugh.
It's not a question. It's very much a comment. Thank you. As I've said earlier in this meeting, I'm in a particularly grumpy mood, and I'm also very depressed about the things we've got to contend with the climate emergency, and I know that's coming up, so that's hovering over me like a cloud. So in that context, what I would like to say is that this is possibly one of the most exciting and best regeneration schemes that I've seen probably in the last 25 years in Sheffield. I'm having quite an emotional response to it. Maybe I'm kind of having an emotional roller coaster through today's agenda, Chair. But I mean, I remember when I first came to Sheffield in the 90s, Attercliffe, which was once this sort of thriving part of the city, was in the depths of its decline. And I remember it was the home to what existed as a kind of LGBTQ gay scene in the city, and there was this experience for those of us who were just sort of getting to grips with our sexualities at the time, having the gay scene and this potentially great suburb of the city both kind of just pushed out onto the fringes and neglected. And as we've seen, kind of the furtherance of civil rights and the kind of gay scene has kind of emerged, and light has been shone on it. So this kind of plan hopefully kind of brings Attercliffe back into its full potential. I do always say on this committee that I'm reluctant about the fact that we pair climate and regeneration, because I think the temptation is that we can just get really excited about these lovely shiny regeneration schemes, and that can detract our attention away from climate stuff. But I think with this scheme, this is a big under-occupied part of the city. It has such enormous capacity to have really kind of integrated, sustainable housing and transport options that link to the city centre with a really sustainable, vibrant community that is exactly the kind of communities we should be developing. So I think in terms of coupling climate and regeneration together, this is a real exemplar, and I just think it's great. I can't wait to see it starting to come to fruition. So thank you. I'll shortly return to my grumpy persona.
And we'll look forward to it too. Councillor Sanger.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, really welcome the report and welcome the vision, and I hope that the draft report inspires local people and the various stakeholders, and that we can deliver this project in the next 10 to 15 years. I mean, like Councillor Gamble-Pugh, I mean, I've been waiting 40 years for this report, as it were. I mean, Attercliffe has always been in my experience, people were talking about the great days of Sheffield and what Attercliffe was like before the Second World War, and when there were all the back-to-backs there, and it was always at meetings. It was how many new houses can we build, and the idea of 1,800 new properties on refurbished land. That's 1,800 properties that we're not having to build on Greenland. So that's really positive. But the vision here, the vision of a new community, a thriving community in Attercliffe, really welcome that. As I say, the last 40 years have been really difficult for Attercliffe. I mean, one of my former colleagues, Councillor Dunworth, every group meeting would say, "Well, when are we going to redevelop Attercliffe? Why is that not coming to policy committees? But why is it not on cabinet this month?" So he would really, as somebody who was born in Attercliffe, he would really welcome this report. The challenge is it's 10 to 15 years. I really hope we can get the partners on board and get local people on board, and we can develop Attercliffe into the thriving community that it clearly needs to be as part of a thriving Sheffield. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your reflections, Councillor Sang, and also Councillor Campbell-Pugh. I can see Councillor Chaplin indicating.
Yes, I welcome this report too, and all the work that's gone into it. It's really pleasing to see the detail. I would just remind Andy Sanger that that there have been a few developments. I mean, clearly this is of a different scale and addresses a different part of Attercliffe. But, the arena did get built. And even when Don Valley Stadium was demolished, we now have the Olympic Legacy Park with all the work that's gone in there for medical research and the work with Hallam University. So there have been developments going on around, but this will really move it up a notch, and that is very welcome.
Thank you. So do I see any of the colleagues who wish to indicate to speak? I don't. That therefore takes us to a decision on this particular item, and the recommendations for approval are on page 129 of the document pack. Are we all agreed? I can see people nodding. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Ruth and Alan, for the work that you've done today, but also the work that you do to convene, to bring together the Attercliffe area board to really deliver on this work. So really appreciate it. The next item on our agenda is the annual climate action report for 2023 and 24. And I think Mark and Victoria are going to be joining us in a second in order to take us through it. For the benefit of colleagues in the room, but also those people who might be at home, we're on page 263 of the agenda pack today. Thank you very much, Mark and Victoria, for your work on this, but also the work that you do to help us deliver on the climate emergency day in, day out.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Mark Whitworth. I'm Service Manager for the Sustainability and Climate Change team.
And I'm Victoria Penman, Sustainability Programme Officer.
So the report that we have in front of you today is our annual report, which we're going to do. Victoria's going to run through a short presentation, which are on the slides behind you. You can see on the screens, and then we'll be able to respond to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much for receiving this report today. I'm going to give a brief overview of the approach to our reporting and to the contents of the report. And as Mark says, we'd be very happy to take any questions at the end. Next slide, please. So this is our second annual climate report. This year's is a little more streamlined than last year's, but has the same aims, which is primarily to track progress, increase transparency and accountability, and perhaps most importantly, to stimulate further action by celebrating our successes and sharing the positive impacts that have been achieved. In terms of scope, the report covers our citywide greenhouse gas emissions, so for the whole of Sheffield for 2022. That's the most recent year that they are available from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. The Council's own greenhouse gas emissions from 2023, so we've got more up-to-date data for our own emissions than we do for the whole city. And the highlights of some of our activity and progress that's taken place between September 2023 and December 2024. These highlights are focused on the Council's activity, but it does also include some information about activity by some other key partners. Next slide, please. So the report starts with the Council and City emissions progress. Within the Council, our emissions have reduced an overall 20.7% since our 2019 baseline, and reduced slightly by between 2022 and 2023 by 0.5%. This 0.5% year-on-year reduction mainly reflects a 5% emissions from our own vehicles from 2022, but at the same time is offset by an increase of 8.7% in street lighting and ancillary emissions. A significant part of this is due to the concentration of carbonisation of the grid. So to illustrate the scale of the challenge that we're facing, if we aim to reduce emissions by approximately the same amount each year, we would need to achieve annual reductions of between 9.7% and 14.6% across the different thematic areas to reach net zero by 2030. So it's an incredibly difficult challenge and gets more difficult year by year. Next slide, please. At a citywide level, the large majority of emissions are not within the Council's control, but we do report on them so that people are aware, we've got that transparency, and so that we can understand where and how we and other organisations and individuals can best act. So Sheffield produced 2,211 kilotons of carbon dioxide equivalent of greenhouse gases in 2022. This is a reduction in annual emissions of 3.2% since 2021 and 17.2% since the 2017 baseline. Sheffield would need to reduce emissions by a further 62.8% to achieve the maximum 85% reduction in emissions, which the Pathways to Zero report considers achievable by 2030. So again, that's a very significant challenge. It's worth noting here, I think, that this isn't just a Sheffield issue. Looking at the data for all local authorities, nationally, DESNZ reports that there have been a 5% reduction since 2021, which it reports is largely due to reduction in fuel use to heat buildings. So this is similar to Sheffield's picture. All local authorities have reduced annual emissions by an average of 16% since our baseline of 2017. Next slide, please. So, while the numbers aren't what we need to see and what we hope to see, there is a lot of good work taking place, and the report also highlights some of this good work. Whilst we recognise the scale of the challenge, to create change, it's really important that people see progress, and that hopefully that can be used to inspire further action. So the report doesn't cover everything that is happening, but to just give a few examples of the activity taking place. You look at housing. Housing are working very hard to increase capacity to deliver retrofit and energy efficiency work and to bring in increasing amounts of funding. They're on target to oversee works in at least 531 properties in this calendar year, as well as enabling support for residents, particularly those on low incomes and experiencing fuel poverty, and they're working with a range of partner organisations to help them do that. The low carbon project provided support to 290 businesses across South Yorkshire over the course of the project, saving an estimated 1,530 tonnes of carbon and saving businesses almost £900,000 over the next year, and those savings will continue year on year. The project exceeded its targets for energy surveys and for carbon reduction, and it's on track to achieve the target number of grants. In addition to this, the Low Carbon Community Culture Project supported 91 community organisations in Sheffield, saving an estimated 275 tonnes of carbon and almost £400,000 over the next year alone. Just as an example of this, the showroom and workstation alone has installed 245 solar panels using grants both from our project and from another funder, and that will cover 11% of their energy usage, saving the organisation £48,500 a year. So those savings are really significant for organisations that are really struggling at the moment. Sheffield's been chosen by the UK government as one of a small number of cities in the UK to go through to the next round of the Advanced Zoning Programme to expand heat networks. And so funding's been received to roll out energy efficiency, renewables and heat network expansion across the city. And that's going to be an area that we're focusing on. There have been a range of transport achievements over the year, which the committee will be familiar with, including the launch of a Sheffield Connect bus, the new Dutch-style roundabout at West Bar, and new cycle storage both in the city centre and in residential areas. Final example is the partnership with Foodworks to bring Norton Nurseries in Gravecourts Park back into use to grow sustainable local food with and for people who need it. So alongside these examples, there are many other projects to both reduce emissions and to support the city to respond to the climate emergency, as well as significant enabling works taking place to enable further work. Next slide, please. So what next? The annual report also outlines some of the challenges and priorities moving forward. Achieving our targets in the current policy and financial climate will be incredibly difficult, and we don't hide from that. And we will be focusing a lot of our attention within the Sustainability and Climate Change team on trying to increase resource and to draw in funding to try and enable some of that change, including working to influence the South Yorkshire single settlement, as well as we'll also be increasing our focus on energy and infrastructure. We and colleagues elsewhere in the Council will also be finalising the remaining decarbonisation route maps, as well as delivering the actions and priorities identified in the route maps that have already been developed. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the report. There's a lot in there, it's very dense. We're very happy to do our best to answer any questions, bearing in mind that this work is not just the Sustainability and Climate Change team, it's delivered by colleagues across the local authority. So we may not be in the best position to answer detailed questions. We will do our best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria, and I get a sense that many colleagues will have questions, and many of those have thankfully also been notified to you in advance, because I appreciate that whilst you have a guiding role in your service to guide other council services into climate action, you know, many colleagues throughout the councils are also specialists on their specific fields as well, and it's therefore difficult to answer in detail some of those particular questions. I think it's important to stress something that I think Victoria did say in her introduction, that the climate action report that's before us is a streamlined document, isn't it? And that was shaped by collective cross-party feedback, and that feedback was designed to prioritise delivery over bureaucracy and paper writing. It's exactly what we asked officers to focus on, and it's exactly what we wanted, because many of us said, didn't we, in our meetings, that actually what we wanted, we were very pleased that we produced many different documents as a council, many different route maps, and they're all absolutely wonderful, but actually what we want to do is focus on delivery, and that delivery is really, really important. And I guess with regards to that delivery, we all want to see even more progress at a citywide level. Now, Victoria has taken us through a long list of projects that we are currently working on. They are absolutely wonderful projects, but I think for awareness of the rest of the committee, before we discuss this, the trio of myself, Alexi and Andrew, representing our three-party administration on this committee, have asked Will Stewart, our Director of Investment, Climate Change and Planning, who sat at the side of us, and he's agreed to develop a register of internal council projects and also a register of external projects that we are working in partnership with the rest of the city on. Now that work, led by the Climate Oversight Board, which is an officer-level board chaired by our Chief Executive Kate Josephs, now will help us as a committee to have that real laser focus on delivery that can then be reported back to us. I think it was important to raise those two particular items because I know the committee is concerned about making sure that we have oversight of delivery, but also has been historically concerned about making sure that we focus on delivery as opposed to simply writing very long and extensive documents. I don't want that to curtail debate. I think it's really, really important, but I thought it was important to make the committee aware of that as well.
Chair, just to make you aware, we're nearly at the 2.5-hour mark, so we might need to extend.
Can I therefore ask colleagues whether they're minded to extend our guillotine by half an hour? I'm seeing that the committee is content with that. I'll take contributions, firstly questions to Mark and Victoria today. Any colleague? I'll start with Richard, Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Victoria and Mark for the report. Just regarding the how we use our land section of the report, I know many residents and many members are concerned about moorland burning and the impact upon the city, not just from like particulate pollution, but also carbon emissions. So has the impact of moorland burning been taken into account? I mean, is there a risk that whether practices and things that we adopt as a council, is basically those advances are wiped out, as it were, by moorland burning?
So in terms of the actual emissions reductions, those are modelled by government. I can't say for sure exactly how they take into account moorland burning. There is quite a lot of work which is taking place in the Peak District with the council and other partners. But though that work that is taking place will be, I'm pretty sure, I don't know 100%, but I would expect that work would be taking place on land which is not subject to moorland burning. So yes, that's definitely taken into account when work is decided, and priorities are decided.
I think the other thing to add to that is that some of this will also be picked up in some other work which the wider part of the team will be taken forward this year, which is around developing a new clean air strategy. So there'll be some work that will be coming through the committee around looking at that, and obviously part of that will be looking at the impacts of moorland burning. But as Victoria's outlined, the government has a series of databases. The information that's presented in the report here will include some information around, for example, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero's data set now includes information from the National Atmospheric Emissions Inventory. I don't know, sitting here now, whether that includes a figure for moorland burning, but we can certainly take that away and check.
Thank you. Councillor Diamond.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions. Do you want me to do them all at once? And I'm not expecting you to be able to answer every single one.
A couple at a time, perhaps. Maybe.
Okay. Well, let's start with some sort of general questions that probably my first one will be quite quick. Can you explain why there's been increased carbon intensity in the national grid? And the second general question is one that you might not be able to answer, but what policies would the council need to implement to have any chance of the city and council achieving its net zero target by 2013? If you could give any examples, that would be great.
Yes, I'm just going to look at some notes on this. So in relation to the carbon intensity of the grid, I can give you a short answer or a long answer. Might be best off with the short answer. It's quite technical, But so basically the short answer is it isn't anything to do with anything that we've done as a council or as a city, so it's not something that's kind of within our gift. The UK's electricity conversion factors are subject to annual fluctuations, reflecting shifts in the fuel mix used in power stations and the proportion of net imported electricity. There's more detail to that I could go into, but I'm guessing that's probably enough.
Thank you. Okay, and on the second question around policies, I think it's worth reflecting on some of the work which we've identified in the report and picking up some of the work that's happened over the last 12 months and before around creating a strong policy framework. So in that sense, there already are quite, the policy environment is probably not the area where there's necessarily a need for additional support in that sense, because we have a very strong policy framework around things like the growth plan. There's been reference to the local plan, obviously within our city goals and within our new corporate plan around the strands of people, planet and prosperity. I think one of the areas where, in terms of emissions, noted in the report that one of the biggest sources of emissions are from our buildings and obviously closely followed by the fleet. And I think with regards to those and challenging those emissions, it comes down to resources, down to funding. And I think that in terms of that funding, obviously some of that is around capital investment, but I think it's also worth emphasising, and again this is noted in the report, is that there's also a requirement around increased revenue funding to enable services to actually develop some of the feasibility work, because in order for us to successfully bid for some of the government funds that have been available, some of that pre-feasibility work and that pre-design work has been required in order to be able to get through those first gateways. And I think having some of that money to enable people to do that, not necessarily just the team, but other parts of the organisation, I think really would help be able to drive forward on this agenda.
That's very helpful. I've got some questions relating to transport. In the report, it was outlined that the number of people walking or travelling by public transport has not recovered to pre-COVID levels, while the number of people cycling has actually declined even in the subsequent years. Have we any indication as to the reasons for the decline in these journeys across the city?
I've not been able to get this information at present, but transport colleagues are currently working on a walking, wheeling and cycling strategy, which is due to come to committee in April. And I presume there will also be knowledge briefings prior to that. And those will hopefully be able to kind of give you more information on those, and that strategy will, I'm sure, be taking into account those factors.
And linked to that, have we got any figures about the total number of journeys across all modes of transport in the city and whether they have increased or declined since 2017? And also, would it have been useful to see what % of modal share of journeys are private motor vehicles, and whether that has increased year on year from 2017 or decreased, and maybe a chart showing modal share by each transport mode would be really useful for a future report.
Again, I don't have those figures to hand, but we can work with transport colleagues to try to get that information.
Thank you. Then I did have some other specific questions. The report mentioned using hydrogenated vegetable oil. I was just wondering if that is actually better for the environment in terms of what is the carbon equivalent emission saving per vehicle, for example?
It's around 90 to potentially 98% reduction in emissions compared to petrol and diesel. However, there are other potential environmental impacts of that fuel, and our approach is ideally to work towards decarbonising the fleet through electrification. Rather than that, we are trialling that as an option. Some local authorities have gone very heavily down this route, but they say there are other environmental implications, and certainly if nationally or kind of globally all organisations move to that, how one would achieve the change at that kind of scale, the amount of land that would be needed would be very significant. So yeah, that's not our preferred approach.
Thank you. Just my final couple of questions about committee reporting. So how is the climate report linked to performance in each committee, and how do committees report their performance? And linked to that, is the climate risk assessment process working and having an impact? I think colleagues have reflected that climate impact assessments aren't uniform, and sometimes we get climate impact assessments which say that there is no impact on the climate, even when there obviously is. For example, the purchase of an additional waste collection vehicle, which would be a petrol or diesel vehicle, and that's saying that there's no climate impact, is obviously not correct.
Yeah, so in response around, I guess sort of taking that first question really around climate impact assessment tools, we've been putting in a process around looking at trying to triage the process, because as you'd anticipate, there's a huge number of committee reports, of reports that have been done, where there's quite a range in terms of the potential impacts on the climate, and also the resources aren't there for the team to be able to go through every single climate impact assessment. So what we've been asking, or what we're introducing at the moment, is a triage system that's intended to identify where there are more significant potential impacts, and also particular themes of projects. So those that may have, for example, a built environment or construction or energy dimension to them from across the organisation. The intention of the tool, I think, is there to enable services to consider the impacts of those proposals. They're intended to be taken at the beginning of a project. The intention is that services are then responsible for taking that through and identifying, if it, for example, sits within the service and isn't triaged into the team, that they sign that off at head of service level or assistant director level. And also, of course, it's very helpful if committees are also, if members are challenging those and scrutinising those and questioning whether there are, as you mentioned, Councillor Diamond, results that don't necessarily seem to sit with what the actual activity is. But in that regard, I think that it is a positive. It's enabling, again, along with the other things that we are introducing across the organisation, enabling the organisation and different services to actually take responsibility and then take that ownership, but also then combined with some of the training that we've introduced, so some of the online training gives people that greater ownership as well around being able to take action themselves. But of course, I think there is that caveat that there may be issues in terms of some consistency, but I think this is better than actually not having that system in place. With regards to each of the committees produced, as you're aware, a climate committee statement last year. 3 committees are now in the process of taking those statements back through, revising those, updating those. So there is a process in place there for committees to do that if they so wish. I think you also are asking about the sort of the reporting and how each committee reports on their proportion, for example, of the report. I think from a practicality perspective, it's quite difficult to divide up the impacts of each individual service or what that team are responsible for. If you take, for example, buildings, and you've got a number of different services operating out of that, how you then apportion that back to a committee could be quite difficult. I think it's something that could be considered. I think it's a question really in terms of balance and just understanding what that data helps us do, and then being able to identify where the bigger opportunities are that we can then challenge and make sure that the outcome is something that is positive for the climate.
Thank you very much, Councillor Diamond. And thank you also for the advance notice of those questions to officers that allowed them to prepare their answers. Really appreciated. Councillor Mesereau.
Thank you. My questions are all relating to the council's emissions. So firstly, what incentives does the council give to its employees to reduce their emissions? For example, carpools, discounted public transport passes, bike and e-bike salary sacrifices schemes, etc. Have we got any details on this? And also, what disincentives does the council give to its employees to reduce their emissions, for example, free parking? And do we know how many council employees get free parking? Related to that, has the council looked at how to decarbonise the grey fleet? And finally, a question relating to buildings. How much of our reduction in emissions is due to the disposal or non-use of our council buildings? Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got a number of council schemes in place to support employees to encourage alternative ways of travel. So, for example, a cycle including e-bikes and EV car salary sacrifice schemes, salary sacrifice scheme for Northern Rail, annual season tickets and discounted bus tickets. Many council car parks or council buildings have free, secure cycle parking for employees, and officers can claim expenses for cycle mileage as well as for kind of bus or bus fares, or as well as car mileage. In terms of disincentives, some officers and elected members do have free parking, either in car parks attached to council buildings or through parking expenses paid to people who are considered to be essential car users. I don't have those figures available to hand, but I understand the council is looking to reduce the number of roles that are considered essential car users and to encourage different ways of travelling. Moving on to kind of grey fleet, there hasn't been a corporate approach looking at this as yet. But some service areas take a much more proactive approach to this than others and encourage employees to use alternative forms of transport other than their own vehicles where possible. And sorry, could you remind me of a third question?
Sure, it was about buildings and how much of the reduction in emissions was due to disposal or non-use of buildings.
We can take that back because I don't think that we've got the figures relating to specifically about either the non-use or the disposal of those buildings. But yeah, that's something we can look into.
Thank you. Councillor Sanger.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the report. And obviously welcome. Welcome some of the work going on, but acknowledging the huge challenge that we all face. Can you just talk about the work in terms of, it's positive to see the work on 531 properties, and these are council properties, 530 out of 39,000. So, is there any way we can accelerate this process of getting our council stock to get to the higher levels of insulation, sort of the top 3 levels, and also what other funding could be available from the new government in terms of insulation, in terms of other people experiencing fuel poverty, both the private rented sector but also the private sector, because it seems to me that the insulation figures for Sheffield's housing stock are still very poor, and that's driving the use of the use of so much fuel to keep people warm over the winter.
So the figures that were quoted in the annual report obviously related to activity that was undertaken over the past year. I don't have the figures to hand, but I know that housing colleagues have put in some fairly significant bids into government for funding to actually increase that number of properties, both council-owned stock, but also bids for looking at a private sector stock as well. There are also conversations that are taking place with the combined authority around looking at potential to put in a bid, a much larger bid at the South Yorkshire level. So there has been work that's been done for some time around looking at stock condition, looking at some of those wider issues around things like fuel poverty, and that work coordinated, because of course this is a challenge that affects the 4 local authorities across South Yorkshire. So there is a bid that's been put together, or at least there's work been undertaken to look at securing funding for that. and also looking at then the potential wider benefits around things like skills, jobs in those industries that support this. So I think that's obviously one area, and that perhaps answers sort of some of the questions around the funding, around potential funding, and then obviously alongside that, we've talked previously around other funding models that other local authorities have used, looking at how they've used private sector investment to help support investment within their estate, within their own properties. That was obviously something we picked up as part of work a couple of years ago, when we spoke to Manchester, Nottingham, and a couple of other local authorities around some of their experiences. So I'm also aware that the Housing Service are embarking on a stock survey across their 38,000 homes and looking at the property conditions, which again I think will help form some of the basis around the next steps that are needed. But unfortunately, without having all the details, I can't give you answers on the numbers that they're considering here.
Thank you, Mark. It's really appreciated. I think in responding to Councillor Sanger's question and building on the points that you've made, Mark, I know that Will has been working with colleagues in housing, and particularly the Housing Committee, and I know the Housing Committee are really excited about hopefully being successful at that Wave 3 funding bid, which will allow us to do lots of exciting things in terms of our own housing stock. I think Will probably wants to just reflect on that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, it's on that point, and just to go to Councillor Sanger's point, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges we face as a local authority is deeper retrofit of our own council housing, and you've mentioned the challenge there. I think, as the Chair has said, Wave 3 of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, colleagues in housing have been working really, really hard to put the sort of maximum bid in for that fund. I think with a view, obviously recognising that any money that we get is going to be a sort of drop in the ocean in terms of how we need to, the scale of the funding we need to do. Just for members' information, that's been estimated at £2 billion to do a deep retrofit of the council's own housing stock. So that's the scale of the challenge that we're dealing with. But nevertheless, one of the ways that we will be able to attract funding is to get a really good handle on the types of technologies that work, the fabric first approach, so the types of insulation that best sit with our housing typologies, and they're varied across the city, and also some of the methodology around retrofit. So one of the really positive things that can come out of these pilot studies is to understand actually what are the most efficient ways to decarbonise and retrofit our stock. And then when more money's become available, as we've said, either through government or actually probably more realistically through private sector involvement, we're able to present a really clear picture of where to best spend that money and potential return on investment, which of course is important when we're bringing in private sector partners. So I just wanted to update committee on that work, and obviously Mark, Victoria and other colleagues in our small sustainability team have been sitting alongside housing colleagues in writing the housing strategy, particularly those areas that focus on decarbonisation and retrofit. It's really important that we use things like housing revenue account, and that we understand exactly what we need to go through in order to make those changes. But the scale of the challenge, obviously, we're all aware of. £2 billion to do the whole programme.
Thank you, Will, for adding extra detail onto that for Councillor Sanger. Do I see any of the colleagues? I think Councillor Chaplin and then Councillor Campbell-Pugh.
Yes, thank you for the report, Victoria and Mark. I think William has said a lot of what I was going to say and put it a lot better. As I do sit regularly on the Housing Committee, and Andrew, I sit there with the Deputy Chair, Penny Baker, and Alan and Richard also on the committee, and we've all had invites to these special workshops on the decarbonisation programme for Sheffield's council housing stock. And one of the things William briefly mentioned just now, the different typologies of houses. There is a phenomenal range of different kinds of housing stock in Sheffield. Most of it, thankfully, is up to EPC 3 standards, but obviously we want to push that up. but we also need to address the minority of housing that falls into bands D and F, and that's where the largest fuel losses are. But there is a very large programme of work to be done, and the housing stock investigation programme that we've set in motion will give us a lot of data and information which will enable us to make much better choices about where to proceed and how to proceed. But there's no quick fix here, and it will take quite a lot of work, but the Housing Committee has embarked on it, and it may take a while, but it will yield a lot of good results from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chaplin. So I'll just go to next contribution and then just ask for some reflections. I think it's Councillor Campbell-Pugh.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just got a number of questions. First of all, do we have any sense of why the reduction was over 20% in the time since 2019, but then in the time since 2022 was only 0.5%? Then, secondly, do we have a mechanism for monitoring our carbon budget? So I know that when we established the carbon budget, we got external expertise from the Tyndall Centre. Is that something we can then monitor as we go along, and is that built into how we assess our carbon impact assessments? Thirdly, I just wanted to ask, in your view, with all the expertise that you have and that you bring, if you could recommend to us two climate action schemes which would have the best chance of achieving the biggest carbon reductions most quickly, what would they be? And then fourth and finally, what could we do as political leads in the authority to support you and other officers to scale and speed those schemes up? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell-Pugh. So there were a number of questions from Councillor Campbell-Pugh, but also Councillor Chaplin's question.
I can take Councillor Gamble-Pugh's first two questions, and then Mark pick up the remainder, I think. So I think your first question was, do we have any sense of why the reduction for last year was so small relative to the kind of changes over 2019? So last year's, our actual, let me just pull my numbers up. The actual electricity usage decreased quite significantly, I think 15%, but the significant kind of impact was the change in grid intensity, grid carbon intensity. So that's basically offset a lot of the savings that we made, both with electricity usage and also with decarbonisation of the fleet, which actually our fleet emissions reduced by 5% last year, which is much more significant than it has been in the previous kind of years since 2019. They increased in 2020, 2021 and 2022. So in last year they reduced. So actually that was quite a significant improvement. So it was mainly that grid change that was kind of offset those improvements. Your second question, I think, was in regard to monitoring the carbon budget. So we continue to not work with the Tyndall Centre, but the Tyndall Centre produce annual carbon budget information. And so we continue to update our carbon budget data using the information from the Tyndall Centre as well.
So your question about recommending climate action schemes, I think the focus of the report on identifying the need to accelerate and obviously the opportunity for the council to take action, I think that lends itself to looking at, for example, our buildings, and that's one of the things that has come up, whether that's looking at our homes, but also the potential to look at our non-domestic estate as well, and the opportunity to decarbonise those buildings. And I think, again, sort of going back to a point that I picked up on earlier around the opportunity to use some revenue to enable some of that pre-design work, that work that then enables us to put those bids in to develop those plans for those buildings. Obviously, some of that's dependent on looking at, in terms of the asset rationalisation programme, which buildings the council are retaining, but then being in a position, a strong position to actually then invest in those buildings. So I think we can learn something from other local authorities that have invested in those over the last decade, and where they're actually able to, for example, work towards their carbon targets as an organisation, but also have low cost energy for those buildings as well. So I think there's opportunities around that, but obviously in the same way, looking at where our significant emissions are, again, looking at things like our fleet. We mentioned some of the work around HVO, but the idea of looking to try and shift more towards electric vehicles, looking at the infrastructure that's required to actually enable us to do that. And then I think the sort of final part of that around the support that could be required, I think really the opportunity to help find ways of being able to provide that revenue and potentially then enable us to then unlock the capital, I think is really the key to this. Because as we know, there's some really big significant sums that are required to do this. But potentially having some of that funding to enable that initial work to do may then enable us to unlock funds that aren't necessarily from the council, but from other sources as well, whether that's government funding or from looking at some of the other investment opportunities that other local authorities are exploring. And I think that then enables us to go out with a really strong message around the action that we're taking as a local authority. Because I think, as Victoria said at the outset when we're talking about the city emissions, we have less control over that. We can influence, we can try and work with partners and secure their support. But I think by demonstrating what we're doing and our journey that we've been on, we can then use that as a way of trying to encourage, enable and facilitate others to take action themselves.
Thank you, Mark and Victoria, for taking us through that, and also Will for your reflections as well. The guillotine is about to fall on our meeting unless we extend it, but I wonder whether colleagues are mindful for us to vote on this item. Alexi, an extension, do you wish to kind of make another point? We'd move on to a debate. It feels like we've already had a debate. Okay, we'll extend. Do I see a proposal to extend? Okay, how long would you like it to be extended by? A maximum of half an hour is what we can do. I guess I'm also mindful that the trio, so that's Andy and Alexi and myself, have to meet with Tom Finnegan-Smith as well to discuss some bus funding proposals as well. So we also need to do that. So if people are happy, then we'll extend the guillotine by half an hour. Do I see anyone who wishes to make another contribution? Alexi.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hopefully it won't take half an hour. But I think we do feel that the report does not adequately reflect the urgency of the situation and the fact that we're not on target. Although it does state the fact we've already used 54% of our carbon budget to 2100. I think this should be more prominent in perhaps the headline statistic of the report rather than the appendix. We also need to present why this is so important and what sort of future that we're on course for, which is the hothouse Earth scenario referenced by climate activists who have written to every member of this committee. I do really like this graph that we were given. I think something like that would be useful in reports going forward. And you know, we don't want to just build a sustainable future. We need a sustainable present as well, because any delay means the planet's getting hotter and hotter. So I'd like to ask that this report be shared with all the other committees. If we could send a copy to the other committees. I do still feel, and repeat what I said earlier in my member's question supplementary, that I don't think we are using all the tools at our disposal to address the climate crisis, especially in relation to how we travel. And I do think we should ask committees to consider doing their own annual climate reports in some way and measuring their own carbon budgets, how much of their remaining carbon budgets they've got, notwithstanding what we heard earlier from Mark and Victoria about, that might be difficult in terms of like shared buildings, but in terms of the areas of the committee's remit, I think there is some areas that could be reported on by each committee. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. Again, a general comment. I very much welcome the report. It's an important document, even if it's not all positive news. Like Councillor Gamble-Pugh, I was a little bit grumpy when I was reading through it. See the progress, but also the frustration at the lack of progress in some areas, especially as someone who spoke in that debate back in February 2019 when we declared a climate emergency and the urgency of the situation. I still support the 2030 target of reaching net zero, even though that is probably unlikely to be met. There are limits to what the council can do. We can do as much as we can within the council, affecting Sheffield as a whole. We need more money, and we need more money and resources from the government to affect that change in Sheffield and across across the country as a whole. I'm particularly frustrated by the kind of the delay of several years of the various active travel projects that started back in 2020, but now several years overdue. And perhaps if it weren't for those delays, maybe we would have made a little bit more progress, especially when it comes to transport emissions. So, but again, we need the government to step up to the mark and give us the support that we need. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Does any other colleague wishing to make a contribution? Councillor Gamble-Pugh, and then Councillor Sanger. Councillor Gamble-Pugh.
Yeah, I mean it's all taken a depressing turn again, hasn't it? Unfortunately, after Attercliffe. I thank you very much to the officers for the report. It is really helpful to see some of the actions that are being taken and tangible things that are being done to reduce our emissions and respond to the climate emergency. I think Alexi said earlier that this is something that he feels petrified about this, and I think sometimes I feel when we're kind of getting report after report that idea of being petrified is frozen, not just scared but frozen, sometimes kind of strikes me as being kind of where we can be in danger of being, in terms of a focus on strategizing and policy making and the creation of plans in lots of different ways. And I think we are just beginning to turn the tide now towards being very clear that anything that can be done to streamline the reporting, as we've seen in this, to cut down on the officer time of making reports and plans and strategies. We're just starting to see that shift, and I think that is a shift which we absolutely need to give our full political backing to, because we have a fantastic resource in our officer team of knowledge and expertise, and that resource needs to be turned towards the service delivery functions, the internal finance and legal teams, to really push for where we can scale up and speed up our climate action. I just wanted to recognise the fact that we've had the email from a range of activists from the climate movement, some of whom I've worked with and really value their views and their opinions. And I think the great thing about the climate movement is the movement part, and I think we need some more movement as well. The suggestion from that letter was that we should consider rejecting this report in order that it could be redrafted to be a bit more frank and a bit more stark about the scale of the task at hand and the degree to which that we are not on course to meet the emergency that we're tackling with head on. And I have to say, I do have some sympathy with that point of view, because I do worry that if we don't set out frankly the scale of the risk that we're dealing with, how can we expect to bring the public with us and convince the public that we do need to make difficult choices, we do need to do things that they might not be familiar with or might not be on board with? How can we bring the public with us? But then on the other hand, I also know that the public also respond to positivity and the kind of those kind of figures of 99% of people will now back traffic schemes in their neighbourhoods, and that's quite persuasive to the 1% who haven't been convinced. So we need to get that messaging really right. But the main reason that I wouldn't support that suggestion that we reject the report and have officers spend more time reworking it and then more of our time reconsidering it is because I'm a bit fed up with reports, Chair. They're a necessary evil if we're going to actively monitor things, but I would like us to see more move towards climate action schemes. We've got such limited officer time, we need to use it to push for that action, because as we said with the questioner earlier, we need that emergency response. So yeah, I think we need to really do everything we can to scale and speed up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gamble-Pugh. Can I just ask colleagues just to indicate again, was it Councillor Sanger? I think it was Councillor Sanger, yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. And I think it is important that we do get the report, and happy to circulate that to colleagues wider in this committee. I think it's also important that we have an officer team working on this, and we continue as political leads to continue to support the work across the council. Clearly, as Graham Rowe and others have said, this is not where we want it to be. From a global perspective, 2024 was above 1.5 degrees C above the pre-industrial level. As Councillor Diamond has said, we are heading to hothouse Earth at plus 2.7, plus 2.8. We as a Transport Regeneration Climate Committee cannot necessarily control what is decided at COP meetings. We can all read the IPCC reports and get, whatever the word is. And, we're here as political leaders to provide hope for our children and our grandchildren in terms of delivering a world which is livable. And at the moment, we are not doing that, but that is not the fault of this report. And I think we need to focus in on what we as a city can do and what we as a council can do. And clearly there is progress being made, but it's, as others have said, as Graham Rowe said, and the climate activists said, it's not at the pace they would like to see. I don't know where to start in terms of reflection. I mean, I was here when Al Gore came in 2007, but we were talking about it before then in terms of what is the climate, what is the carbon budget, how do we decarbonise, electricity generation, how do we decarbonise heating homes, how do we decarbonise transport. We are making good progress on some of those. We heard today about talking about electric bus fleets. We know where we are in terms of where vehicles are going, and so we can see the progress. We can see the progress the UK has made in terms of offshore wind. We can see the progress we're about to make in terms of solar. But it's about doing it at scale and at pace, and that's the challenge. And it frustrates me. I was sitting here as cabinet member for environment and climate change in 10-11, and we had proposals about community solar. At the time, Sheffield was second or third in the country in terms of solar schemes, and we lost those opportunities. We lost the leadership that Sheffield had at that time. So keen to work together collegiately, keen to find a way forward on this, keen really to take the people with us, because when you're living in fuel poverty, having people say, well, you need to spend more on insulation and therefore you need to move from a gas boiler to an air source heat pump doesn't help give them the answer. The answer is that we need to find the funding available so that those living in fuel poverty are living in good quality homes and can afford the heat to get their homes to the temperature they need to get through UK winters. And we've got 38,000 council properties. As you say, we're going to have to find a way of getting £2 billion to get those properties up to standard. My guess is the private sector is another 2 to 3 billion in terms of if you look at the insulation levels of our property, our properties. It's not just the council sector. It's not just the council housing. Clearly we need to do what we can on the council housing. We need to work with our colleagues in terms of housing associations, but there's also the private renter sector, and there'll be people living in fuel poverty in the private renter sector. We need to think about getting those homes up to standard and decarbonising the fuel elements of that. So there's a lot to do. We need to find ways of giving hope and demonstrating the positive changes that this council is doing, and we are making progress, but there's a lot more to do, and the world can't wait, but we can only do what we can as a council. We can make sure that Sheffield is one of the leading UK cities, and we can continue to argue the UK's case around the world in terms of where we need to be. But it's a challenge for all of us. We just got to keep going, keep saying that we are making a difference, and that by doing things at scale and in the advanced zoning in terms of heat networks is part of that. We can do things at scale, and we will make a difference over the next few years. We've just got to keep at it and keep providing hope and inspiration for people, because as others have said, the numbers are very challenging, and 2.7, 2.8 is not degrees above C above pre-industrial is not where we want to be as a world. It's not where we can be in terms of world population. So we'll do what we can. We need to work together on this, but it's a long, hard slog. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sanger, for your reflections and also the work that you've been doing on this issue since 2010. Did I see any other colleagues who wish to make a contribution? I don't think so. Well, thank you, Mark and Victoria, and also Will, for bringing this report and your reflections as well and answering our questions. The recommendations for our approval, if we're minded to do so, are on page 265 of your very, very long agenda pack. Are we all agreed? But before we do that, Councillor Diamond wishes to say something.
So I just want to check that we agreed to send a copy of the report to circulate amongst all members of the council.
Well, of course, the reports that we have are all available to everyone in the council. A summary of decisions that are taken are always sent to all members of the council as well, so it will be sent to all members of the council. I would hope that colleagues would share with their political groupings as well, and that you'll do that with your Green Party, that we'll do that with the Labour Party, and that the Lib Dems will do that as well. Of course, we could send an email. You're welcome to do so as Deputy Chair if you'd like. Can I move on to the recommendations, which are on page 265? Are we all in agreement? Please raise your hand if there's any dissent. You're not that grumpy today, Craig. I can see people nodding. Thank you very much, colleagues. That item has therefore been approved, and thank you, Mark, thank you, Victoria and Will, for your efforts to bring that to us today. Thank you. That therefore closes our item today, as I understand it. Thank you very much for your participation.